Hey there, and welcome back to Checkbox Other, the podcast for those that don't fit in a defined box or category. I am your host, Nikki Innocent, and I am so excited for this episode this week. It is my birthday week, and do I get a lot of energy around my birthday. And sometimes people hate talking about their birthday, and they hate getting older, and they hate thinking about this stuff. Well, I am the opposite. I've always loved the opportunity to celebrate life. And this year, I am taking a very concerted moment to look back in the past year that has happened, and there's been so many incredible things. I have had the opportunity to make this wonderful connection through a podcast with you, so thank you. Reflection and gratitude for you taking the moment, even right now, to listen to this podcast. And also, the excitement of a birthday is the ability to vision for what is to come in the next year. So kind of like what you do on New Year's, you think about what's coming in the next year and you make resolutions. I like to think of my birthday as an opportunity to start a new chapter and to really, really create an incredible year ahead. So I hope you join me in that process. New Year's or not, birthday or not, feel free to use my birthday as your opportunity to really look back and reflect on the past year and look forward on what's to come. And also appreciate the present moment. Sit in the appreciation, notice and understand how incredible it is that you exist at this moment in time right now. So amazing. You are meant to be who you are, where you are right now. And there is so much power in just that realization. So as part of my birthday, they do these registries and gifts for baby showers and for weddings and for all that. And a birthday party, you bring a gift. So I'm going to ask you to give me a little gift here. It's not a big gift, I promise. But I'm asking you to join me in celebration by, one, pretty easy. If you can share this with maybe 3 people, share this podcast one way or another, whether it's this episode or a previous episode, or just telling somebody about it and sending them the link to my incredible episodes and my incredible podcast. Yes, I'm talking about it because it's pretty cool. I'd really, really appreciate that gift. It's such a gift to be connected with other people through this incredible forum and this incredible opportunity to highlight some unspoken voices and stories and topics. So if you can share with 3 people, that'd be cool. If you don't follow me on social media, another wonderful gift, follow me at Nikki Innocent on any of the social medias. We've got Facebook, we've got Instagram, we've got Twitter, and also I'm over on LinkedIn if you're looking for any kind of business relationship to work together. Speaking of working together, I do keynote speeches, I do workshops, I appear on panels. I am just so excited for the opportunity to be in person and in connection with people around a lot of the topics that I talk about. So I talk a lot about living authentically and shifting the paradigm of leadership to authentic leadership. And a lot of times that comes with groups that are interested in talking about women's leadership, interested in talking about diversity and inclusion, interested in talking about belonging and feeling othered and handling kind of that kind of murky water of feeling as though you don't belong, or really handling the dynamic of how power and privilege play out in ways that aren't necessarily intended but do create discomfort and conflict and confusion. And so I do a decent amount of work in those spaces. Check out my website, nikkiinnocent.com/speaking, to see more about the topics that I cover if you think it would be something that would be helpful for you and your organization, your company, the networking group you're part of, any of that stuff. And do reach out. There's a form on that page that allows you to reach out to us and let us know that you're interested. I also do coaching. So if you are in this space where you're looking, as you're visioning until the next year, to step into your leadership potential, to work through some issues and problems and obstacles that you feel like are coming up and you really are ready to take that next step forward and make some change, I am your gal. I do women's leadership coaching, and specifically this women's leadership coaching I think is so important. There is this new report that just came out this week from McKinsey and the Lean In organization. They do an annual Women in the Workplace study, and it's a 64-page report. I'll try to distill at least the key finding to you, and I'll include both the 64-page report and the kind of summary article for you on the show notes. But it's all about this shift in understanding that it's not just that there are not women in these most senior leadership positions. In fact, the percentages have gone up. I mean, they've gone up slightly, and we have a long way to go. But the findings were that we're actually having a significant issue, and why this disparity is happening is within that first opportunity for promotion, for growth, for that stretch higher. And so they're calling it the broken rung on the ladder. And so you're, taking that first step on the ladder, and your next step is actually broken, so you can't put your foot there to leverage yourself up to those senior leadership positions. And I think that is so important. It's actually, I think the reason that I have chosen the path that I've chosen coming out of corporate, that I found myself having a really, really difficult time moving up in organizations that didn't necessarily have support at that lower level to help me and others that looked like me, that thought differently, to continue to move up, because it was more of this, hey, if you can be a carbon copy with those before you, then we'll keep you going. So it really is important. I think it's an important place to think about things and focus our energy, especially if you're kind of in my age group, if you're an elder millennial, if you're a younger millennial, if you're a younger Gen Xer. I think a lot of this stuff is a very familiar experience of this struggle to get into a management position and to be respected and heard in rooms. And that is what my coaching is all about. I also do coaching for men, and I do team coaching, but specifically, I feel like with all of this incredible data that's come out, it is like, again, I love when the data matches all the work that I'm doing. I'm like, thank you for validating this work. This coaching is so important. And then finally, I do want to mention that I do have a Patreon page. You will hear this in the episode. It kind of caught me off guard with Felice, but Patreon is a way for you to be part of a digital fan club and to contribute on a monthly basis to this work that I'm doing. And, I have an opportunity for as little as $2 a month, so $1 per episode if you're liking this stuff. I'd love that. I'd love for you to just be part of this and to invest in this. It's pretty cool. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but this is a fully self-funded podcast at this point. I am doing the editing. I am doing, obviously, the hosting and the questions and all the stuff. And any support you can give would be amazing. It's also kind of that thumbs up that I was mentioning when the data validates what you're doing. When I have your support, it actually keeps me going. So $2 a month, less than a coffee. If you're up for it, that'd be great. And, I really just am so eager and excited for what's coming this year, and so grateful that you're part of it. So finally, I'm going to hop into the amazing Felice Duffy, who is our guest today. So Felice has known me since before I was born. Crazy, right? She's a friend of my parents in college, and I have known her growing up, and she has been this incredible beacon of female strength in the world that I grew up in, which was definitely a very masculine world of soccer and soccer coaching in Connecticut, and just most of my time was on the soccer field one way or another. And so to have this incredible leader, Felice in the 70s, while she was in college with my parents, was the first person on UCONN's campus to fight for Title IX reform. And she was the leading voice to make the women's soccer team at UCONN come to be, and equitable treatment for women at UCONN. She played for years and then became a coach at Yale and continued the advocacy and that fight for equity for women athletes. No big deal. She's also been recognized in the Connecticut Soccer Hall of Fame for all this incredible work. Just a little, brush the shoulders off for her a little bit. After her coaching time, she became a lawyer, and she worked in corporate law and was a federal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in both of those roles, just continued to fight for equality and equity. It's so cool. I can't wait for you to hear the stories that she shares. She talks about the fact that when she was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Newtown shooting happened. She also talks about Ferguson. When the Ferguson protests were going on, she was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was leading the charge in bringing together law enforcement and the African American community to have conversation in such a polarizing time, creating that place for connection and for discourse that wasn't always pretty and wasn't always easy, but was so important. And we talk a lot about the importance of empathy and really allowing people to step into one another's shoes to see from a different perspective a situation that can be very contentious. And so I loved that conversation. And then finally, one of the things we do talk about is Felice is representing one of the defendants in the college admissions scandal right now, one of the coaches. And we talk about how important it is to really critically think about the information that we as kind of the public get from news media and social media about these incredibly scandalous, viral topics of outrage. There's another, I think it was NPR article and segment around outrage. I'll include that in the show notes too, because I thought it was incredible, and how our outrage on outrage is just burning itself out, and the importance of actually leveraging that feeling and that burning feeling that comes with outrage to change, to make change, and to really actively take a step forward. Because at this point, we're just shouting at each other in an abyss, and it's burning us all out and making us more exhausted. Which, you get my perspective, I think there's kind of a benefit to the power and privilege structures that we have now for us to tire ourselves out by shouting into a void. So we talk a lot about how legal proceedings and the public consumption of that can be misconstrued, limited, that silence can be taken as either fact or information that wasn't really provided, and a lot of times that's not the case. And so, yeah, there's so many, you can't tell there's so many things, and we've got a really, really, really incredible episode. I really hope you enjoy it. Oh, finally, the one thing I do want to mention, I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous episode, but I have been reading this book called Burnout. It's from Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski, and Felice and I talk about kind of being a workaholic and burning yourself out a bit, and we don't actually use those words in this episode, but you think you'll get a hint of this feeling of like giving everything you've got, and really, I mean, she talks at one point about giving everything she's got to the point where she had 3 knee surgeries and just kept going, that her body was screaming at her to stop, and she kept going. And I know that was the reality for me, and is the reality for me many times, that my body is the smartest person in the room. My mind and my soul think they know what they're doing, but my body's got it going on. And so if you are in a situation where you're feeling burnt out or on the verge of burnout, I hear you, I feel you, I see you, I get it. Again, I mentioned my coaching. I coach all about burnout, so please do reach out if this is something you're interested in navigating through. But we talk about the importance of really slowing down and allowing for your work to be part of your life, not your whole life. Okay. I think I covered everything. My goodness, this is a great episode, and I am so excited to hear what you think. Pop a comment on any of the social media posts I do about this episode. Feel free to drop a review on iTunes. Whatever feels good to you. We have a form on the website, nikkyinnocent.com/podcast. There's a join the conversation link if you want to suggest potential guests and topics, if you want to provide feedback, if you have questions, drop it all in there. Okay, here is the incredible Felice Duffy. Hi, Felice.
Hi, Nikki.
Welcome to Checkbox Other. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and it's so good to see you again.
Oh my God, so good. I'm fidgeting all around here because I'm excited. I try to keep it within my body, but sometimes it's got to get out. So I know you mentioned that you listened to a couple of these, so I'm going to start off with my favorite question up front. Is I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. What has gotten to you to where you are today, what you're up to, aha moments, anything you want to share to give a little bit of a background of who you are and what you're doing.
All right. Well, since there's so many years and my memory fades, I always preface what I'm saying with the things I say are based on what I believe I remember. If I get something wrong, it may very well be. No bad intent intended. Mm-hmm. So if someone hears this and like, that didn't happen, it might not have, but that's what I think. So I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Right. So I think really one of the things that began my journey was growing up with 9 brothers and sisters.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All within 12 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so I think, and it forms, and I'm going to talk really, my journey has a lot to do, and I know some of the focus is on Title IX and gender equity and, you know, the idea of being an other. And that's, you know, a lot of what I went through is this feeling separated because I've been in a lot of male dominated careers.
Right.
But I grew up with 9 brothers and sisters, and there were 6 boys and 4 girls. And we grew up in Storrs, Connecticut, mm-hmm. in a very, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, very civil rightsy, liberal environment. And I actually believed boys and girls were treated the same.
Yep.
And it may be because my parents couldn't tell us apart. It may be because they couldn't remember our names, and division of labor was just, do you mow, you do this, I don't care who you are. And I understand that now, but I was never treated any differently in my family. And we didn't really go anywhere because there was 10 of us. So we were in this little microcosm of being treated, you know, and we all treated each other that way. And we happened to be in that environment, the University of Connecticut, which was very focused on civil rights at the time. So that kind of informed my growing up. And as I went, you know, through high school, aside from all those other things that all happened in high school, you can ask me about those later. But I was basically, I raised sheep at a farm, and that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be James Herriot and all creatures great and small and be a veterinarian. And I was our high school was on the Storrs campus, University of Connecticut campus, you know, which was all free campus and free everything back then. And I was literally walking over, I believe, sometime 75, 76, so I'm dating myself, to go get an application for the vet school. And I think I got lost, and this is where my story may or may not be totally. But I remember getting lost and walking over McMahon Hill, if you know McMahon Hill.
I do.
Connecticut, anyone out there that's listening that knows that, you'll remember McMahon Hill. And I saw like a Fields of Dreams vision. There was lights, and it was getting dark, and it was dusk and there was a crowd around. And I wandered, it was compelling. And I went up and went through like 30, 40 people deep, and it was the old UCONN soccer team.
Hey.
And I want to say that your dad, who was my coach, who was the person that actually showed me what the love of soccer is and what passion means. And I'm so grateful for that. I believe he was playing with his brother Medrick.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think they ever played together. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure that ever happened, but I remember seeing one of them playing, but it was at the time when soccer was the throwback to football. It was the counter institutional thing. It wasn't what it is today in America. And it was the people who loved to play, played, and it was full of passion. It was very ethnic. And I think it was Brown versus UConn, which was just traditional rivalry. And I literally watched, and you could feel the love of the game and, you know, the true soccer, as you know,
yes,
there. And I literally went, I want to play this.
And
there was a soccer team at Smith, the school I went to. I never played.
Wow.
I just was like, I want to play here. Lenny Santeris coached as a student teacher, who was then the UConn women's soccer coach for 30 years and just retired last year. And from that day on, I walked right over to the athletic department as a high school kid and said, I want a women's soccer team here, because there weren't any, because nobody played soccer. I think there was 3 teams across all divisions in the country for women's soccer.
Wow.
There was nothing. Nothing. Castleton was one. I think Brown might have been one. I think maybe Colorado College. Nothing else. And so that began the story of spending from when I went there in 77 to 79, trying to get a women's soccer team, going through all the hoops you can imagine, great stories of men and women that helped me.
Yeah.
But really, there's a few stories of some women that were just so amazing, that stepped out, like 4 women across my life that I can just point to them. They probably don't remember any of this. But going through, talking to the athletic director, getting a team, getting 80 people to sign up, and them saying, well, that's not enough. I'm like,
you only need 11 on the field. What do you mean?
I got 80. And so blocks, I remember somebody the AD threatened to kick me out of school. And I thought it was hilarious, because I'm like, who cares about me? I didn't realize it was an actual threat. I mean, it is, but I was just like a farm person, was like, nobody's going to kick me out because they don't care.
Right.
And it was very interesting, because I went through a couple years and I still have all those notes that I wrote. I have them and I want to do something with them.
Yes.
It's so I kept notes, and I would go in, and I was 17 actually when I went my first year, and I was doing all this just because I wanted to play soccer. And they'd say you could have a field, and we played E.O. Smith or in the rain, or there'd be no refs. And remember Jim Evans?
Oh yeah.
Jim Evans was a star at UConn, and he was on crutches, and I picked him up when he was hitchhiking, because he had crutches on, in my VW bug, drove him home and got him to ref the rest of our games at the UConn soccer club. So all these people that I still connect with,
Yeah.
and found your dad and was like, hey, would you come coach our club? And he just did.
Yeah.
These amazing people that are really the backbone of what I perceive to be the beautiful game in this country. I got saying, you're talking to me about how important it is to be with people that do cool things, where they were people like that are really amazing. I met your mom through soccer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's all these connections. But so for 2 years, we went through this arduous process, and every step of the way, there was the men's soccer team that was there, that was by Coach Maroney, who I actually grew to love and respect.
Yeah.
I really did. At the time, I was pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
And Title IX required you to actually go and try out for the men's soccer team. And if you remember Coach Maroney, girls in soccer don't mix. Like, they just didn't. And I remember being terrified, because he was a large, domineering man.
Right.
And then said, I got to try out for your team, Coach Maroney. Except I think I might have called him Joe, because that's kind of who I was back then. Nobody called him Joe. Like, so, Joe, I got to try out for your team. And I swear it was like Lucy and Charlie Brown. I was like bowled over when his response was like, get out of my office. And I said, no, really, the law requires me to do this. And he said, fine, how about this? You did, you're cut. So I checked that box out. I was like, you sign this? He did. And we ended up with the help of a couple of guys who had daughters. A lawyer who had a daughter, Mary Lou Breen, who became our goalkeeper, her dad. She was an All-American, brilliant player, who I still stay in touch with. It's amazing. He helped file one of the first complaints with the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is now the Office for Civil Rights. And I know we mentioned maybe my law review article that kind of says what I think is the historical sociocultural response to Title IX.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear a little bit about the law review.
Well, and it sort of sets out how the law I've said it in like social stages.
Yeah.
The law came out, I can't remember, I should have read it. The law came out in a certain stage. I don't remember it.
It's okay. I'll include it in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go deep on it.
Well, but it basically talks about a throw, like women came out and they played and the law adjusted to that. And then it kind of it pitted men against women when they started cutting all these men's teams. So it's probably very, very good.
I'm sure.
I'm sure it'll come up in a minute. But what I was going to say about that, in that art, what it does do is it sets up to show this pattern of 1972, the law came into place. 1975, every school is required to have a report that says this is how we're out of compliance, because everybody was.
Right.
Because it requires you to have equal opportunities, equal athletic slots for every person, men and women, 100 football players, and you got to have 100, somebodies for women.
Mm-hmm.
And then by 75, the report had to be filed, and then you had 3 years by 1978 to come into compliance. So I'm at UCONN in 77.
Right.
And after that, historically, supposedly there was a whole bunch of, for about 2 years, there was some teeth in the law. And then the public and notice comment to these regulations was the most commented on than any other regulation, because my claim is it really hits the bastion of male supremacy, which is football and sports. So people just hated that it applied to athletics. Right. So after a few years, they took it away from athletics. I don't know if you know this.
I did not know this.
Yeah, so it applied to everything else. And it wasn't until the 1987 Civil Rights Restoration Act that they reapplied it back to athletics, because there was so much fight that, like, you can't touch football.
Right.
So it was very interesting. But I was in that time frame.
Yeah.
So I was in the time frame where they were supposed to do this Title IX report. And I'm just going to give you a couple of highlights, because as I'm doing this, and I'm like a 17-year-old sheep herder that grew up with 10 kids. Half my clothes were my brother's. Hopefully they weren't the underwear, but who knows? And running around. And I remember filing a complaint with the help of my dad, was the faculty advisor. We'd gone through all the administration, and the lawyer would just pull me in. I'm like, I don't care. And people would say, you want to have equality? I was like, I just want to play soccer.
Right.
I wasn't even like, I wasn't like, we got a gender equity. I just wanted to play. But I remember getting a call. It was Felice Duffy. Meet me at the third pillar in the student union.
Feels like a TV show. Okay.
Where my memory's a little different.
I like this. Let's go. I like this TV show. Let's do it.
So I did. And it was the former football coach who had been fired.
Oh.
And he handed me the Title IX report that they never filed because it was so far out of compliance.
Oh, I just got chills.
Right. And it turns out I ended up later coaching his daughter in high school. Just, interesting stuff.
So
I
cool.
remember, and I'm not trying to dime anybody out, but I don't think it'll matter. I remember going to the Title IX coordinators, one of the very first at UConn. I'm not going to say her name, but I love her. I don't know if she knows that. She probably doesn't remember me. She was an African-American woman. She was sitting down in the basement of this tiny room, and I was like, hi, I'm supposed to go to the Title IX coordinator and try to get a women's soccer team.
Yeah.
And I sat there, and I remember her saying to me, Felice, I am a token. I can't help you. If I help you, I will be fired. She said, if I were to help you, I would give you all these papers, but I can't. And now I have to go to the bathroom for 15 minutes, and there's a copier. Swear, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there thinking, is she ever coming back? And the good Catholic girl in me was just like, and then I'm like, ooh, I think she just told me to copy these. So I did. Right? So I copied them. So it was help along the way from not just women, but men and women for whatever reasons. And I ended up getting a letter from OCR, HEW back then that said, there's been no gender discrimination, your case has been filed. Nobody ever spoke to me. So I get my VW bug. It may have been the first time I was out of Connecticut. Drive up to Boston, I ended up in Maine, turned around, came back to Boston, went up to the civil rights office and basically went there in person and said, how could anybody, because this wasn't in the day of cell phones and email, how could you do this without investigating me? And the guy looked and said, oh my God, you're right. Someone just put this at the end of the file. And if you read my law review article, during that time, there was about 400 complaints that were lost.
Whoa.
Right.
400.
I have that complaint. I have a copy of it in one of those boxes.
Yes.
I saw it the other day. But then they reviewed it, and then they wrote to John Toner, who was the AD, and I have the letter that said, I think it happened to also be the same day the Civic Center roof collapsed on the basketball team. So it was just a bad time.
Oh boy. Yep. Okay.
He said, if you don't give them a soccer team, we're going to take all your federal funding. Now they don't do that anymore. They threaten, but it's basically, and he did. And then he said, and don't you think though that women don't need a bigger field because they can't run very far? No. He said, don't you think they need a bigger ball because they can't see and kick a little ball? And I was like, no. But that was really, and then Mary Lou Breen came from Castleton and joined us, and we ended up having a team that was third in the country. Lenny came, and he's been the coach until last year.
Yeah.
So that was my first step into fighting for equality, and it became a fight for equality. I just started out with me, I just want to play.
Right.
Fight for equality. And then I kept trying out for the national team and doing those things, and decided this is crazy journey, but I should go to, it's hilarious because I work with college students now, right?
Yeah.
But I think I want to stay an extra year at UCONN playing, so I flunked 3 courses. Rather than, what would you do now? You get your master's. I flunked 3 courses. I said, I'll just take them next semester and get A's. And I did. And I'm like, see, I'm smart. I had so many student loans. And then I did end up staying to get my master's so that I could how else can you play for the national team when, I was working full-time, part-time, suing the university and going to school full-time. So now once I had finished playing soccer, I was like, I want to still try out for the team, national team, and play. Yeah. So I thought, well, I'll just keep taking student loans and go to school and I'll live. So I got my doctorate. But when I was done with classes in 85, and then I had to write my dissertation, I had made the first pool of national team in 1983. So it was fun. We traveled everywhere. It was the old time, so many good stories, which I won't go into, of just how it used to be. And I wouldn't give up anything for those days because it was the people that wanted to play because you got nothing.
Right.
Crazy. And just, it's amazing.
It was that joy of the game you were talking about when you walked up the first time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it was. And it's really, it's so complicated now with recruiting and parents and money and wealth and uniforms and why they're playing and refs and hurting people and all that stuff. I mean, we hurt people back then, but then they didn't play. We've sort of self-policed in a good way, ethically.
Right.
But I got a call from, my brother started working at Yale as the band director in 85. And I got a call from the AD, and it's still nobody. And he said, we want to hire you to coach the women's soccer team. And I didn't want to coach. I wanted to play. I hated it. Coaching is losing control. Like, there's no fun there. Like, and I was like, at Yale's like academic. I don't want to do that. I want hardcore people that,
Yeah.
And he went and he showed me like 100 people's applications, and there's 3 women. And I didn't want to coach. Right. And I said, and I picked out Jim Edmonds and I picked out Lenny Santeras. And I was like, look, I think you should hire a woman because I think that's important. And I think everything else equal, you should. But if you're not going to hire a woman, these guys are great. Right. By the end of it, he manipulated me, I believe. He said, if you don't take the job, I'm going to hire this woman who I thought she had 0 experience. So I said, yes.
Yeah.
I ended up at Yale for 10 years. First day I walked down, I said, I'm going to file a Title IX lawsuit and quit because the women get to have buses when they go to games, like the guys.
Right.
The women don't get to play on the practice football field, which is a parking lot. They get to play on the game field. So, and I wrote memos for 10 years. And I have those memos.
Yeah.
Do something with them too.
Yeah. I feel like we've got to create a whole exhibit of all this stuff. Come on.
Well, yeah. But through that whole time, because I really didn't want to coach, it wasn't like I was just saying, I'll finish my dissertation and then move on. And my advisor kept giving me extensions of my deadline, which was not helpful, even though I asked for them. But I was really the civil rights activist because other people, I fought for same-sex stuff. I fought for racial discrimination because people who wanted to be in the profession couldn't do it.
Right.
And I was fine doing it because I was like, please fire me. I don't want to coach anymore. But what I've learned, because I represent people, that it's just so hard to do that when, you don't want to lose your job. Right. And I ended up leaving Yale because of a conflict with the athletic director.
Yep.
Even though I hired him and I liked him, but I knew that the way I wanted him to treat women and the way I wanted, was going to conflict with him, and I didn't want to go through it because it was so much work. But I also went to 5 universities in 1995 that said we were going to hire women because of Title IX. That's when the Brown case had come out. And I was by far the most experienced on paper because we'd gone from 0 in the league to 16th in the country, Division I, no scholarships, won the Ivy League championship. All that with, and PhD, coach of the year, all this stuff.
Right.
So, and at every one of these very large institutions across the country, one of which was down south where they have marching corps and they castrate bulls at halftime of the football game for motivation. The AD pinched my butt on my job interview, 1995. I know for you that sounds a long time ago, but it's not in the history of the world. And he said, "You're a good looking girl, maybe I'll hire you."
Oof.
That was the first time, Nikki.
Wow.
I didn't say, "What are you doing? Take your hands off me. I never worked for you," because I did that my whole life. And it hadn't worked, and I thought, no, you know what? I can use this. I want to get in here because it was like $1 million. It was just this great job and I can affect women's lives. And I thought, it was the first time it felt a little out of integrity, but it also felt like I understood you have to, I don't want to say play the game.
Right.
It's such a hard pill to swallow, but you got to do it. And I could do it. And they offered me the job and I loved the women on the committee. And 3 weeks later, I got a letter. They offered me the job. I was picking out a house. I was telling them I was leaving. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call that said, "We decided to give it to someone else." And they gave it to a man with no experience. And so, of course,
with no information, no,
that's all I got.
It was just, okay.
And right, so, and this is, you want to talk about feeling other, or I was just like, and I couldn't tell. I was totally shamed. Like I told everybody I got a job, and now I don't.
Right.
And my back went out, of course, sanitized, and I was lying in bed, and I got a call from a woman named Phyllis. And she said, "I could lose my job for telling you this. I was on the search committee at one of those schools. And I just want you to know you were by far the most qualified person. And the entire search committee wanted you." And our AD called the national coach, who I have an interesting relationship with, and I ultimately respect him and whatever.
Right.
But he said I was controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And I was. I fought for women's rights.
Right. Yep.
And the committee said to them, "Of course she is. She's fighting for women's rights." That was it. I went to 4 different jobs with stories exactly like, women don't need locker rooms. They love changing in their dorms. If you come here, are you going to make us get a locker room for them? I'm like, yep.
Yep.
Hire a guy with no experience. And so I left coaching, because of the staying at Yale. I just didn't want to always be having to fight for everything. Right. Or be complicit in a system that treated women as second-class citizens.
Yeah.
And Yale was a great place to work, too. It was like probably the best because, and I knew my First Amendment speech was protected. I used to walk in the president's office and say, "I'm going to see this ring I have on. It's my Ivy League ring." I had to fight like that. I had to say I was going to file lawsuits to get this because they wanted our women to raise the money to pay for these rings. On the same year, they were paying for limos to take the football players who lost every game to New York to get like a sad sorry about the season dinner.
Oh.
So I fought. I literally, memos. I was like, this is unfair.
Right.
The president, I'm going to file Title IX. So fine, you got your rings.
Right.
So I go back, and the senior women's athletic director, which many times, unfortunately, creates, you need to have a woman that's not going to fight for women's rights because otherwise they'll get rid of her. So it's very not.
There's a dance.
Yeah. So so they said, "Okay, we're going to give you 18 rings." And I'm like, "Okay, but we have 24 people on the team." Well, the other 6 you have to raise money for. I said, "But those 6 are more important than the 18 because the 18 got to go to travel to games. Those 6 people didn't. They paid more. They never got the benefit. They're more important." Nope. Walk back to the president's office. "I'm going to file a Title IX suit." He's like, "Okay, you got 6 more," but got exhausting.
Yeah, I can believe it.
Yeah. So I went into administration at Yale for a year to do, I should never be in administration. Like, last thing I want to do is push papers and do that stuff. But I was going to be a sports psychologist and do cool things. And I was going to law school at night.
Yeah.
And I had, in fact,
doing all these things.
Yeah.
I'll just say this. The whole time you've been saying this, I'm like, how do you have a life on top? There's all of this takes so much, not only just time, but energy to be able to show up so fully and to have to be in this fight one way or another. And then you add school on top of it and.
Well, I didn't have much of a life outside of it. Well, I did. I mean, it was fun for me. I liked it, but it was my career. I was a workaholic.
Yeah. But sleep even, I mean, like, how do you, like, there's just so much. I feel like I'm trying to picture like what a day would feel like. And it feels like, even just as, growing up as the daughter of a coach, right? And I know how much went into doing that work on top of a job that he had as well. And, being a parent and all, and then add all of the additional I fight to exist, right? Fight to be allowed in the room, fight to be on the same field that's probably not even being used. Like, all that kind of stuff is just, it makes sense that after 10 years of fighting, you'd be like, okay, I need to find another avenue here.
Thank you for that, but I still think it continued after that.
You're like, I moved away, but I kept doing it. Okay, yeah.
And this is part of personal growth and development.
Yes.
Because as I was leaving Yale, I actually got involved in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, I'm happy. I'm doing this stuff, but I don't have a life. I don't have a family. I don't have kids, even though I was perfectly comfortable not. Yeah. But I was also like, something wrong with me? Like, what's going on? And I guess I could tell there was some discontent. And, I'm hardcore Irish with, 6 brothers that, beat me up. Well, and my 3 sisters, just craziness. Yeah. So like, I'm very stoic. So I had really good defenses, right? And my first therapist, unfortunately, said, no, it's not you, it's Yale. They're terrible. And I'm like, okay, great.
Great,
so,
thanks.
A couple of years later, a couple things happened, really important things for me in athletics with people that mattered to me in the administration. Yeah. There was some very disrespectful stuff that almost got to the point where I actually couldn't take it. And it forced me to decide things. It was, as life does, until the more defended you are, until things happen to you, it forces you to address them. And I believe that of illness and sickness, because I've had a number of millions of injuries. You're never going to walk again. You're not going to breathe again because your back's fusing, that I've all believe were messages to me. Like, wake up. What are you doing?
Right.
Your chest is compression because your heart's covered. Like, open your heart. Seriously. Yeah. I mean, we're talking 25 years after going through all this therapy and stuff, but great messages coming from all these places if you're open to receiving them.
Yeah. And if you don't, right, if you're not open to receiving them, they just get louder.
Right. I wished I'd received it after my first knee operation, but it took 3. Oh. So, right. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. Seriously, like, maybe I shouldn't be running 15 miles a day every day to avoid life.
Yeah.
So, and then I actually 5 years before, everyone kept saying, you should go to law school. And I always thought about it because I enjoyed arguing, and I might still, but I'm more open to the other side now. And I don't always have to be right. But I'd taken the LSAT test one day. I walked in, it was the old days you could just walk in. I'd been really sick, missed work, I took it. And then I got a message in July when I was thinking, what am I doing here? Do I want to stay here? And it said, your LSATs are about to expire in a month. And I called Quinnipiac University that had just had a law school come in. It wasn't really accredited. I said, I know you're starting in the fall. Are you taking anyone? And when they were looking for people.
Right.
You have a PhD, you have this, you're a coach, come on. So, I just was fortuitous in a way, but if you're open to like letting the energy in and karma, very cool.
And being willing to take a chance and put yourself out there, even if it doesn't always necessarily feel as vulnerable, of just being like, I don't really know, but I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to let the world figure this out rather than me having to figure it out before I show up.
And that's a lot how I counsel the kids I'm working with now about, the fear of not going the traditional route to get into some path to do something. Just really exactly that. And that, you know this, but when you go into an interview, everyone's like, say this. It's like, you should be asking them, figure out why you want to work there.
Right.
They'll appreciate that and they'll hire you for that reason. So it's exactly that. It's like, put yourself out there so you can, see if something can happen.
Right.
And it is going outside the box, and that's kind of what I do, but it's going outside of the box in a way that expands the box. It doesn't, just break through and go outside of it, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I went to law school part-time at night, and I went for 3 months and I quit. And, cause it was a Socratic method, and I was 38, and I'm with like 18-year-old kids that don't want to be doing anything. And I was like, I quit.
Yeah.
And I went to the dean, and he ended up being a friend. And I went to him and just said, I'm quitting. He said, I'm going to keep you enrolled. I said, do not keep me enrolled. I'm quitting. I'm never coming back. So the next fall, I called him up and I said, did you keep me enrolled? He said, I did. He said, can I come back? And he said, yeah. And then I, was doing the year at Yale in administration and going to school. And I did not want to be a lawyer. I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was really the beginning of my awakening and like, what am I doing? Who am I? What have I been doing for this many years? I don't think I slept in 3 years. And I, for the first time in my life, got worried about it. I used to take classes, and if I did well, great. And if I didn't, I didn't care. I didn't do good in the ones I didn't like. And this, right. I got really kind of weird. I actually experienced death anxiety sometimes. It was really not a pleasant, but great personal growth. I had great, wonderful people supporting me. And I ended up being first in my class. Hey. And let me tell you something, Nikki, I did not want to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm glad I am now, but I really wasn't. I was trying not to fail. Right. And it's really, if people recognize that fear of failure versus the hope of success, and talk a lot about that in sports psychology. Yeah. It's a very interesting, to get to this place, and it's a very scary place to be, where everything, and I see a lot of kids with anxiety that, and I feel for them, because it's not a good place to be. It's not a good place to come from. Right.
And always striving for the top, right? This idea that if I'm not number one, then I failed, even though you've done more than enough to be successful in what you need to do for yourself, is setting yourself up for that anxiety and setting yourself up for living in that smaller box of your life. Because if you're not the best, it's kind of like Talladega Nights, where he says, if you're not first or last, like that whole idea of like, if I don't show up and take the gold or take the trophy, then the journey didn't matter. That just, why show up at all?
So here, listen to this. Tell me how this lands on you.
Yeah.
If something is worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. How you like that?
Deep breath, deep breath.
I said that to the football coaches at Yale, and they got thrown out of their office. That was one of the things that my therapist told me, that first time he heard it, because you're expecting him to say it's worth doing, right? And he goes poorly, and you're like, that's not capitalism, that's not America, that's not achievement.
Right.
But that was what I'm striving to. Yeah. The journey. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing it all. Right. And a lot of people strive for perfection, so they don't ever do it. But if it's worth doing, just do it. It's okay to do it poorly. Yeah. A couple of things like that. And the whole, good enough is perfect, right? And it was funny, because that's another thing. This is my initial introductory therapy. You're okay if you don't win. Took years to get that. I'm telling you, it must have been hilarious. You knew me years ago. I didn't, but I'd love to see me, because I'm like, who was that? But I remember him saying, good enough is perfect. And I was like, this is so cool. And I made him a t-shirt, right? Mm-hmm. And I gave it to him. He's like, what is wrong with you? Because I had written perfect is good enough. He was like, oh, it's not going in. So those simple messages, and what are the roots of those, and where did it come from, your family of origin, how is that, and to look at those rather than, because you can't say you don't have to strive to be the best. It's really deep-rooted stuff, and it's a lot of personal growth and figuring that out, and it's a cool journey to be on. Yeah. I think everyone's on it, or not on it, but could be on it.
Right, and it's even just the way you're talking about your journey, right? It's this idea of allowing for the room for things to show up, because if you only have, I've actually had a lot of conversation about what your mountaintop is. And if you identify that mountaintop, but all the steps that you're taking are not good ones to get there, but you get to that space, it's never going to feel like what you expected that mountaintop to feel like. So you don't allow yourself to experience what's happening on the way there and potentially pivot and go on a different route, or go back down that mountain and realize that's not the mountain I need and I got to go start another one. Then you're really just going to get to a point where you're not sleeping, whether you're literally not sleeping or exhausting yourself. And then you get to this point of, I've been so afraid of failure this whole time. I've achieved, and the achievement is still not satiating whatever I need here. Then what do? You're at the top of this mountain. You've got to go all the way back down, figure out, hopefully, but a lot of times not, figure out why that didn't work on the way back down of dealing with failure, because you still feel like a failure even though you achieved. And it's just like, when we blindly go for something to be the top, how do you then navigate once you get there?
Right. So I had 5 mountains.
Yeah.
Which I've learned from that, I'm just going to say.
Yeah.
And it may or may not I mean, I'm not trying to tell people this is their thing, but many times people don't feel good enough, either from a conflict with their mom or dad or whoever, that they learn that achievement is the way to get attention. And they're not doing this consciously, but they're searching for their parents' love by being first in their class in law school, by being on the U.S. national team, by suing the university and winning, by then going and getting a clerkship with a federal judge, which was an incredibly wonderful experience, by being first in your class, then going to work at one of the best law firms in the world in New York. And each time you get to the top and, your mom and dad's love isn't there.
Right.
And you're dissatisfied all the time. And that was me. I mean, I was happy, I was fun, it was great. And then I'd get there and be like, oh, I'm done.
Right.
And then I left the law firm in New York. It was a great experience. But it was, white shoe, ultimately male dominated. It's like, I'll be there for a couple of years, do some cool stuff. I did a lot of civil rights stuff. I worked in the Chelsea AIDS clinic. I did a very cool case with a Burundian, half Hutu, half Tutsi woman trying to get asylum in the United States, all because our firm believed in it. I did a case representing a death row client who's still alive.
Nice.
Cool stuff in addition to my regular work, so I didn't sleep there either.
Right.
I also lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is the hood in Brooklyn. I don't know if you know where that is.
I think we came to your place.
Oh my God, I think you did too.
That was my first time ever in Brooklyn.
Well, no, that was the nice place.
Oh.
One of my best friends at law school, who was first in her class and graduated the year after me, was an African-American woman who had come up. She grew at the same age. I was 40 when I graduated. She was 40 when she graduated, which is unusual.
Yeah.
And she called me about this New York law firm because I was like, I'm never working for any law firm because, and she said, look, I'm Black and this is the best place to work if you're Black. It's the best place to work if you're a woman for a couple of years because they'll treat you well, but then you got to get out because you're never going to be a partner.
Right.
So I was there and she had purchased a home, condo. What are those things called?
Like
the things in New York that if I had a brain, you remember.
Like a townhouse.
It's not row houses, but it's.
A brownstone?
Yes, brownstones.
I got you.
And she'd redone it. It was beautiful inside, but it was in one of the poorest neighborhoods and one of the most high crime neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And I grew up in thinking everybody treated men and women the same. I was like, I'll show up. And I was the only white person on this whole block. And I didn't realize I was from stores. So I'm riding the subways at midnight. I remember a guy came up to me and he said, you're going to get killed, right? And I looked at him and I thought, well, are you going to kill me? And I got scared for the first time.
Yeah.
I had no sense of self-preservation. I ultimately moved because I represented someone who had, as a cooperating witness for a federal case at this big law firm at Sullivan and Cromwell in New York. And we had learned that there had been some murders committed right behind my house.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, I'm so out of there. Plus, people were not nice to me. They were like, what are you doing here, Whitey? I mean, not that I understand the other side. I get that. When I first moved in, I tried to get a credit card and they wouldn't give me one because of my zip code.
Right.
And I called up and I used the law firm and I was like, you're treating people differently. And I said, what if I was somebody that wasn't educated and didn't know how to do this and didn't have the time or the resources, the money to fight you? So I was kind of always doing that. I think I always was like, I'm going to be down with the people. I'm not going to take the limos home. I'm going to take the subway.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even more so, so there's the access and the education, right? But also having to, and I mean, this is what I feel like I keep feeling as you're saying that you call people up, having the wherewithal to be willing to fight with a system that's constantly telling you no, and you don't belong here. And I don't care how legally sound your argument is. We are going to put that a placeholder piece of paper at the end of your argument, no matter how well you do it. The idea that you still have the hope, whether it feels like hope or fight or whatever, to continue to keep fighting that fight as you're getting the same kind of systemic bullshit thrown your way every time it comes through.
Right. Till a certain point. Then the hope and fight goes away or went away.
Yeah.
Then it comes, because I think the hope and fight is about the injustice you felt maybe as a kid, whatever the psychological motivation.
Yeah.
I think you treated away by mom or dad or whatever.
Right.
It's making me try to find that and fix it, which will never be fixed and you'll never find.
Right.
So I look back on it and I'm like, wow, people are going to just look at me and know that I had all these psychological wounds from my life. It sounds cool, but right. So
But there are a lot of people that take those psychological wounds and create more wounds.
That's true. No, you're right. And I think everyone's life is about this. You can look at it that way, and it just depends how you use it and where you go. Everything I did, I'm so proud of some of the things I did and the people I met. So it's not wasted. It's the journey.
Yeah.
Right. And so I left the law firm actually because, Jana, my sister, she had gotten a supposedly terminal illness.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
So I still think it's the body giving messages.
Yes.
So she kind of undid that whole myth about that with a lot of hard work and a lot of good, healthy nutrition.
Yeah.
But I remember calling her up and saying, I don't know how to get out of this law firm without having people hate me because they think you're supposed to give your life. And I was like, do you mind if I use your illness as an excuse? And she's like, yeah, now go ahead. A little bit. So I did that and came to work in Connecticut for like 7 months at a really good small law firm. But what I realized is that the big law firm I was working on, we were like suing the president. And I was doing those cool cases. And it was all cutting edge, lots of resources. And I came to a little law firm, which is a very good law firm. And I'm gonna just say this was my perception, like, ew, because I don't like the law in that respect. The civil procedure where you're pissing and moaning and fighting and trying to be the best, and it's paperwork, and you can't just say, let's do what's right. And I was like, why do I want to be a lawyer? The only reason I wanted to be a lawyer, I think you'll appreciate this, was when I was in law school and I met Ernie Teitel, who's a very, very good lawyer in the state of Connecticut, and he teaches there. He's a big plaintiff's lawyer. And he came in and he talked about being a trial lawyer with integrity. And he talked about and I always thought about sports that way. Like I might accidentally break your leg or hurt your knee or whatever, but never unethically, never breaking the rules, playing hard, and doing that, or if I broke the rules, admitting it, whatever. And he talked about that. And for the first time I got up and did trial practice in front, and it felt to me like being an athlete. You're on your feet, you're prepared, but you got to be ready. You don't know who the ref's going to be. You don't know what the weather's going to be. It could all fall apart, but you got to be ready.
Yeah.
I did in heels a few years, and then I stopped doing that when my heel broke in front of a jury. That was bad. But other than that, my knees hurt less than when I played soccer. That's that thing. Then what is that? What is that about sports? It's about a need to achieve. Sports has been associated with that. So what is that? There's something there about this whole theme, like rising to the top. What's going on? And it always like had me at its core.
Well, and there's also the piece of, I hear my father and his accent saying anticipate, right? Yeah. That there is this feeling of like, I know the rules, I can show up, I know the amount of time, but I actually don't know how this is going to play out. And so it's testing both my physical stamina and my mental stamina to be able to have the answer or the best path forward in whatever situation comes. And on top of that, which I keep hearing in the things you're saying, it's not just about me. I'm part of a team that's doing this work. So it's not just how can Felice do the best she can do, but we're in this together one way or another. We're all kind of doing this dance. How can we get to an end point where we can win the game, or at the end of the game feel like we had a good game?
And I talk with your dad, and I really mean this to me because of your dad, and because, he embodied that, the perception of what happens on a soccer field, the communication.
Yes.
For me, even at the highest levels of play, the thing that satisfied me and made me feel the most was connecting with another person in their eye, reading that it was like give and go. You're going here and you read that through the people, they get that. And it's just, and when people don't get it these days, what's the fun of playing? And that's what you're talking about, right? So it's that connection through and I think it is about connecting with people to do something in the best way. It's a little, I'm much better. Like I said today, it's, let's just wing it because then it's fun.
It is.
Who wants to hear about it?
Well, and I think too, if you play, so I always felt crazy, and I felt like I was the only person on my team that didn't actually care about me scoring a goal. Because I again, we're talking about my dad, so I got a lot of my soccer fluency is from my father. And I never really understood, and this is going to sound so silly because he still has scoring titles. So sorry, everyone. But I never understood the feeling of wanting me personally to score. I always and I felt silly, but I was always I would prefer to be the person that passed the ball to the person that scored or orchestrated something that got us there. That was way more important to me than any kind of personal glory.
Sorry, I think we're having a little connection problem.
No. Okay, we're back.
Only because you froze, but it was a nice.
I know you did too.
Oh.
So I don't know if you heard what I was saying.
Yeah.
But I was just saying this idea of personal glory over team glory and really being part of the process is so much more important to the way that I learned how to, and really I learned from, again, you said in high school, college, right? But I always tell people I kicked a soccer ball before I could walk pretty much. So my way of connecting people, one of the primary ways was always through the game of soccer. And I grew up around people that English wasn't their first language. So their language was soccer. And so much of that is embedded in how I build a connection and get from one place to another and handle difficult stuff is so much through just the eyes of the soccer field, which sounds a little, I mean, I don't know. It makes a lot of sense to me in my body as I say it, but.
Well, I'm right. As a sports psychologist, back then, there was a lot of cross-cultural studies that shows that each different culture actually plays the types of games that mimics its economic strategy. So I'm going to get this wrong, but you'll get the idea.
Yeah.
In cultures that are about, that are about discipline, like their economic strategies through discipline, they'll play games like chess and strategy. In other cultures where it's about more luck, they'll do gambling. In the United States, it was about achievement and capitalism. So you played games of physical prowess. And really the point in those games that you play as children is to create a false environment, or a not real environment, a game. It was really a game where you could test out social skills and strategies. You could learn how to be cooperative with somebody. You could learn you don't have to be the one that scores, that when someone else does, you could learn how to lose with grace and dignity. Because in the end, guess what? It's just a game, right? That was when I feel like I grew up. That's what I got, from understanding that it's a good, I wanted to win.
Right.
I would have, well, this is untrue, but I was going to say it anyway. I want to say I would prefer to have played well and not win, but I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah.
But I think I would have, because it was more to me about how you played. And I'd hate to lose, but if we played well, I'd be okay, know. And what's happened in, I think, in the recent years or whatever, whether it's the demise of the nuclear family, whether it's technology and people communicating that way, sports is reflected, and it's no longer a game. If you're playing at 12, it matters whether you win or lose. There is no safe space. I hate to use that word, but there's no, it's the whole microaggression thing, but there's no safe space to figure out how to achieve and cooperate and learn. So nobody does. So when you get to this is, I think, one of the reasons our world's in the state it's in, people don't know how to do it. They never got the practice.
Yeah.
It's all about me. How do I get to achieve without learning the process?
Well, then you have both of them, right? You have that goal-oriented and really winning-oriented approach, but then you have it starting with the participation piece. It's the participation trophy piece that if you show up, you can go, right? And so there's that gap in between of how you get to just exist, right, by the contribution and by the integrity that you show up with, and by the stuff that's really the hard work, right?
Right. And it's life. Life.
Yeah.
I don't believe in participation trophies. Okay.
No.
Throw that out there.
No. But what I mean is, like, if you're coming into this game, right, and you don't even know, but you're coming into the game where everybody gets a trophy.
Right. I hear you. Just
by showing up that way, your mentality comes through that. There's a book that I've referenced a couple of times and I actually find really great. It's called The Millennial Myth. And it's about kind of the juxtaposition of the generational change of like traditional workplaces and generational mentality, which and kind of modern or technologically driven mentalities, and how the millennials are coming from a place where participation trophies were their baseline. It's not, as a little 5-year-old kid, you weren't saying, oh, I'm not going to play unless I get a participation trophy. You were told participation trophies were part of it. So that was like your 0.0. That's where you were starting at as your foundation. And then it became that to exceed, excel, build your resume as a human being from, a very small, very young place. But also there isn't that, as you were saying, there isn't that life piece in between that helps you understand how you got from one thing to another and how to lose with dignity and grace, how to, literally not try to hurt someone, but if you do, take accountability for what happened and work towards making things better the next time around and making sure that that person's okay. You know, there's a lot of this stuff that I love that you went to the sports psychology part of it, because it really is such a reflection of so much more than just on the field or the court or the arena, wherever, whatever word you use for the place you play, the game you play. It's so much more than just in those, I was going to say four corners, but not everyone plays in four corners. So yeah.
You know, it's funny. The one thing I just want to say is I think what's really important to understand about athletes, I did a lot of research on athletes.
Yes.
That they're the good athletes, the ones that succeed, are motivated by a sense of internal control. So if you ask somebody, why did that happen? They'll say, either I didn't do it good enough, you know, or I should have done it better, or someone else will say, the sun was in my eyes.
Right.
So it's internal. But what we're talking about with participation trophies, it takes the reason you're playing and makes it external. You're playing because your mom and dad want you to. You're playing because you're getting a trophy. So you never develop that internal structure that motivates you.
Right.
It never gets into you, like why you're playing and what you like and what you do.
Yes.
So it's
so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool to hear you say it, because so in some of the diversity and inclusion work that I've done around biases and unconscious biases, now I'm not going to remember what the bias is called, but one of the biases was about kind of shifting the blame out elsewhere.
Oh, I know.
Like,
confirmation
you know, like, no, it was like one of the more like new, I'm sure it's a shade of that, right? There's all these specific names for these things, and everything that when we were going through these trainings, I kept thinking of soccer because that's what made sense for me. It was like, oh, well, when somebody passes the ball and it goes out of bounds, or they're, you know, whatever, it goes wrong. There are the people that are like, my bad, I'll do it better next time. And then there are the people that are like, oh, you know, it was wet, or the ball needs to be pumped, or like the sun's in my eyes. And it was always such an interesting thing, because I do feel like I personally had such a struggle, because I grew up with a very specific way of learning the game in my household. And then I played in suburban Connecticut, where it was a very different way of, if you didn't have the Sundays of going and watching my dad play, right? And being around all these people that have played the game because it is like in their blood, it's in their DNA, you're learning it in a very different way than I learned it. And I never really put those together, I don't think. I mean, I think I knew somewhere, but I never really put together how significant that was, both on the soccer field, because I played college as well, but in life, of how that has always been a bit of a struggle for me. And you know, people have always said, oh, you act older than you are, or you do X, Y, and Z differently. You know, I've always been around a lot of adults growing up. I mean, being an only child, and my parents were divorced when I was pretty young, and so I hung out with a lot of their friends. But I think there's a part of it that so much of my understanding of myself and my place in this world is through sport and through soccer, and like strength and belonging and acceptance, all through a lot of that stuff. And I never really gave myself that information. So I thank you for this therapy session right now. I appreciate it so much.
Very welcome. I won't even send you a bill.
You can. I'll give you my mom's house.
Yeah.
Address.
Yeah, exactly. It's always therapy for me too, Nikki, at this point. Everything is. So I'm grateful as well.
Okay. So I feel like I have so many things that I wanted to talk to you about. I feel like you touched on so many of them. So, I do want to do this. So we stopped kind of around the space of you going from large firm in New York to smaller firm in Connecticut. And so where do we go from there?
So although I never saw myself as a prosecutor, because I tended to align with the sort of far left wing, liberal, hippie, anti-law enforcement mentality generally. As when I had clerked for Judge Underhill, who's just the best, he was an incredible mentor that changed my life. Have you ever been with somebody who provides an opportunity for you to actually learn and see, and, you know, and so he was a federal judge. I had watched U.S. attorneys or assistant U.S. attorneys who are federal prosecutors who prosecute federal crimes in the District of Connecticut come into his courtroom. And I always had respected them because it was always about integrity. And yeah, we're representing the government, but we're really representing the truth. And very different than what you see about law and order and, you know,
right.
state level stuff. And there's, you know, every once in a while, maybe there's an outlier, but really it was about getting to the truth. And it's easier to at the federal level because you have FBI, DEA, ATF, IRS, all these agencies that do all the work, and they come and there's like, here's all the evidence. So it's, you usually got a pretty good case. So it's a little bit easier, I think, to stick to the evidence. But I watched them, and one of my friends who I had clerked with had become a prosecutor. And I knew him and I respected him. Yeah. And they had told me that there was an opening, and it's different in Connecticut than other states sometimes too. And, I was always interested. I always kept saying, I'm going to work for the other side, and someday I'm going to open my own firm. I'm going to work for the big company, own my own firm. So I kept saying, and that was my mantra. And I worked for all these big organizations, ultimately realizing I'm basically an anti-authoritarian, which is not a good thing. But yeah, my boss now is terrible, and I work for myself. I mean, I fight with her every day. It's crazy. At least I'm not torturing anyone but me. But a position opened, and people were like, I knew the people I'd been working with, and I thought it was really cool, and I knew it's an incredible opportunity. But I also was like, I was old. I was 40 something. And there's a lot of people that say, I'm going to go to the right law school. I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to go to Yale. I'm going to do this. I'm going to click for a judge, a second circuit, and I'm going to go to the U.S. Attorney's office. And I was like, I coached a semi-pro team during law school. I didn't really work for a firm. Right. I did all this other stuff, which is, I think one of the reasons that people are interested, because you have so much different experience. But went there and fortunately got a job. I was literally going to France with your mom.
Oh, yeah.
And they called up because I had applied, and I never do paperwork well because I'm always like, it's homework, I'm not doing it. And I got it in at the last minute. I'm literally going to France with Jean.
Yeah.
And they called me, you have an appointment, Friday at 9, and I was supposed to be at Bradley at 2. I was like, yeah, I can't. And they said, well, this is the last one we have, otherwise forget it. And I was miserable in my firm, and I was like, well, all right. So I packed my luggage, I got in my car, I go to the U.S. Attorney's office, and I'm looking out the window because I work right by it right now.
Yeah.
And went in with like 5, and it's one of those things like, you don't get to say to feds that you want a job from, gotta go.
I got a plane to catch.
Well, I did.
Yes.
Well, we were talking for a long time, and it was a great talk, and I respected them all. It was fun. And I also really thought, there's no way I'm getting this job. It just was like, I really didn't. And it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I'm so sorry, but I gotta go. And I left, and I was like, and it was millions of interviews and all this stuff. And
right.
And then when I was in France, someone got to me because we didn't have cell phones. Right. Somebody was like, you need to call someone, and I had to get a reference in order to get it. And I'm like, oh, whatever. And then I got back, from France and had a great time, and got a call the next day when I'm sitting at work, and someone said, I can't remember his name. It's probably a very good reason, but said, this is so-and-so, and just want to know if you want to like join Team America. Something like that. That's my name, right? Yeah. So I'm like saying, Bill, like it's my brother. I'm like, what do you want? Cut it out, Bill. And he's like, no, this is so-and-so. And I'm like, right. I'm saying this. Sure. Like, no, it really is. And I was like, if anyone can't see me, I'm making profane noises.
Silent profane.
Right. And I was like, well, sure, I'd love to join Team America. I mean, I don't know what to say, but it's just such this interesting path, right? I go to France, I come back, and like did everything kind of you're not supposed to do.
Yes.
And then I ended up working there, and amazing experience. Not a lot of training. I think I have this. I'm confident in what I'm doing, and I really have this little girl inside saying, I don't know what I'm doing. Someone please train me. So tool of life that I'm still working through.
Yeah.
And I worked for, I guess, the first couple years in organized crime and drug enforcement, which is large drug trafficking organizations, mostly in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which was just interesting, and working with FBI and seeing wiretaps and understanding that. And I was not pro law enforcement at all. And I will tell you, because I know that one of your questions touches on this, but I developed an incredible sense of appreciation and respect for law enforcement. I know there's downsides to it. I understand why some people join and that there's abuses of powers are everywhere. But for people to volunteer to literally, even if you're a traffic cop, put your life on the line every day to protect people, I don't think people understand. And, to bring a case, at least federally to bring a case, there is so much work. You have to do so much and fill out papers and do all this stuff. And it's incredible amount of time and energy. And there's certain characteristics, I'm sure, of people that draw them to that, which we can talk about some other time. But it's this amazing group of people that really, literally, I think would put their life on the line to save you, just to do that. And it's amazing. And there's, you know, there's a lot of not good things that happen, and I get all that, but that basically everyone I worked with, their intent was good. And all the prosecutors I worked with, whether I agreed with them or I didn't agree with them about their philosophy, never saw somebody do something that I thought even hinged on being unethical. Never. And you know, the whole wiretap, they're going to be watching us. You know how hard it is to get a wiretap? I can't tell you. It would take months of work. You've got to say, this is the only necessary thing. You got to write affidavits and bring evidence, and it's so much work.
Right.
It's not like someone can just be like, you know, the movie, you know, if you
like The Wire. It's like The Wire where it seemed like, oh, well, they just pulled the wool over our eyes. Here's another wiretap. It's like, wait, what? No.
No. And so I really respected that to the point where I, you know, I was a little weirded out about people following my keyboards and listening to me and stuff, but I always had a little of that. But if, you know, the whole, do you want your GPS on your phone or not? I'm like, I'd want it on because I'd want the law enforcement to be able to save me if they could. You know, even though I don't want anyone looking at anything I'm doing, but it's hard to express that in the kind of places I hang and the people, because it's really important to understand. And so what ended up happening, which I think hinges on that, is, so I went in not knowing what I was doing, was like big time mandatory minimums, you know, 20 years for possessing marijuana, mandatory minimums, all that stuff. And I was just following the rules kind of. And as administration shifted, changed, things shifted and changed. And then I was in charge of Project Safe Neighborhood down in Bridgeport, which was gun violence and working with gang members and but with the cops to reduce violence. So I got into this prosecuting the cases, but also setting up a system, which is part of the plan, with local law enforcement, with community organizations, with ex-offenders, which that's not the right word anymore. I think it's returning citizens, where I'd meet once a month with the local law enforcement, but you get the right people and sit there with usually about 75 African-American males, but could be anybody, but that was a general constituency. And what used to happen in those meetings from my perspective, not always, but you'd show up and a prosecutor would say, don't do this again. If you possess a gun, I'm warning you so that you don't do it because I care about you.
Right.
And being a woman, I think it's a little different. I could do this because I'm not as threatening. Right?
Yeah.
And I also learned from Judge Underhill, I think I might have known this anyway, but after he would have a sentencing with somebody and say, you're going to jail for 30 years, he would walk down and look in their eyes and shake their hand and said, I wish you the best of luck. And I saw people, he hit the spot of self-esteem and dignity and respect, their chest would puff up, they'd be better off for it. Right. So I really learned, and I believe this, that you treat somebody with dignity and respect, you're okay. I mean, I went to a lot of situations I probably shouldn't have, but I'd go sit in the middle of the 75 literally. And the, marshals were there and they're like, what are you doing? I'm like,
for people. Yeah.
And people were cool with it. And I'd be like, here's my cell phone. If you get in trouble, call me, I'll help you. Don't lie about stuff. People want to help you stay out of jail.
Yeah.
I loved doing that. And we got this whole group to do that. And it affects, so that was fun for me, but it was not really what I was getting paid to do, but it was part of the job, but I always ended up doing that.
Right.
And then I went into white collar, more major crimes, which is bank robberies, child pornography, which I only did 2 cases and couldn't do any others. I refused to look at the evidence. I just didn't want to do that. One of my supervisors saved my life by saying, if you can avoid it, don't look at it because you can't unring that bell. Newtown happened when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we dealt with it right in our office. And I didn't deal directly with it, but I watched incredible people go do that. And I saw not only I can't even imagine for the people that were involved in it, but the people that helped, the first responders, I watched the impact on that on people, and it's really so destructive. Right. And as Deirdre Daly came into our office, who was the first woman U.S. attorney in the District of Connecticut, she was, we are a branch of the government, so it was Obama and Holder at that point, and they had just asked for a reentry and outreach coordinator. They were trying to take away mandatory minimums. They were doing the Title IX stuff and sexual assault on college campuses and trying to address that and the culture of rape where women aren't empowered to report. And I became the outreach coordinator and the community person, in addition to doing my regular job.
Right.
And I love that part, creating systems and going into places and bringing federal judges and bringing people to see the other side. And I loved doing that.
Bringing people together. Yeah.
And that when Ferguson happened, I ended up having the privilege really of being given the power and the authority to work with police officers and the very polarized Black community that didn't trust law enforcement. Difference, and and so here I'm a white person, right? And it's funny because I understand oppression from being a woman. I think that I've been very sensitive to not being treated right, but I'm white, so right. Imagine that. But I think I get an idea of it. But it's always a tricky thing because you can't say that to somebody who's been in a different situation.
Right.
But I still think it's the same thing. You're not going in, you're not a savior, you're just saying, let's get people together.
Right.
And I'll just tell you, I went to a meeting in New Haven, and I was the only white person on the panel, perhaps in the entire auditorium. And this was right after Ferguson. It was angry crowds.
Yeah.
And one of the lawyers was up there, and I liked him. We were talking like, oh, your son's a brown, blah, blah. And as soon as the panel started, he was like, you're a racist, you're white, you shouldn't be here. And he was doing it for a point, and right. I didn't feel any danger for him, but I did from the crowd because he was fighting them. And I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And, so we lasted through that. And I remember one of the law enforcement guys, this big, I love him, he's a friend of mine, the big Black guy, he's like, I'm walking you out. And I was like, yeah. So that group of people, though, I got those people that were inciting to go to one of the town's law enforcement, work with the cops who were mostly white, but had 2 Black cops, train them on the simulated computer firearms thing, where you're trained about the rules about when to shoot, when not to shoot.
Oh.
And when you go in there, it's very scary. You end up killing people who don't comply with your orders.
Oh.
And each one of the community members went in and came out and was like, oh my God, I can't believe that you're at such risk as a cop. And I can't, and all the things, and I'm not minimizing abuse of power and all that.
Right.
But what they realized is like, wow, if you don't comply, there's a good chance you're going to get killed or the cop's going to get killed. It's really, just put your hands on the wheel. You don't want to do that if you think somebody's abusing their power. But they sat around afterwards, and it was just such learning because people interacted, treated each other with respect, went through an experience where they got how scary it was to be a cop. And we were saying next time we're going to have the cop be in the wheel where they don't have the power to say no, and you're going to get hauled in jail if you don't, we didn't quite get there. But there was a white cop in the room, and he looked like the prototype poster child of I'm going to beat you up if you look at me the wrong way and if you're Black.
Yeah.
And I very, very carefully always choreographed what happened because someone says the wrong thing and you can damage stuff.
Yeah.
He's sitting back there and everyone's been talking and it got a little heated, but then people were sharing and it was really about sharing.
Yeah.
5 hours, supposed to be 2. This cop goes, can I say something? And I'm like,
yeah.
And really, it's one of those things where the easy thing is to say no, but I kind of looked at him. And if I had said no, I think it would have almost engendered more mistrust.
Right.
Everybody been like, why? What's he about to say?
Right.
Sure. And he got up and he said, I have never learned so much in my entire time on the force. And it was just, people were crying at the end of it. And I'm like, if this is just what the world could do right now.
Yes. Yeah.
And we don't. And it's so simple, but it's not, but it is.
Yeah. And we get to a point where we just distill it down to like these very polarized states of being, and we miss the humanity in it all. Like even the experience of, by saying that you gave the experience of simulating the experience of a police officer and understanding what that experience is, does not excuse the abuse of power, the mistreatment, the violence that happens, right? It doesn't excuse that. It just informs more people as to what's going on in the situation. And I think, again, my brain immediately went to, it'd be really helpful for a simulation of a very similar sense that wouldn't, the part that's difficult is that the systems and structures that create that wonderful simulation a lot of times are fostering the experience that's happening on the other side of the experience, right? Those simulated people are having a different experience than what the simulation is allowing to happen. That there is this embedded generational stuff that comes through that you can't necessarily simulate or maybe a white police officer to really understand how much goes into a traffic stop from the person that's at the wheel and what they're learning and what they've experienced and what they've seen and what they've been told, right? And how they've experienced the fact that driving while Black is a real thing, right? And so this experience of really, instead of saying you're right, you're wrong, but saying, like you're saying here, I am here to create a space for you to connect and converse. And it's, at the end of the day, it's not about who's right and who's wrong walking out of here. It's about understanding that we're becoming more human with each other. Like, that's, again, like you're saying, the world would be a much better place if that happened. It would be amazing if we just even made some more strides to get in more of those situations and create more of those spaces.
And I think that was happening, but I left the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2015. And I think the current administration there's a lot more polarization going on.
Yeah.
But I would say it's based on fear of not knowing each other.
Yes.
I think cops are very afraid. And if they're white and they see a Black person that they don't know, they're more afraid than if they think they know the white person. So it's all fear-based. And you're right, just connecting about that and talking about it is important.
Well, and it's this whole idea of the reason that fear is there is it's so much less about the actual people at play. It's not about that person. That person isn't the person that's making you fearful. It's all the bullshit that you've been fed. Wherever you're getting, I mean, social media in itself is what just came to my mind because it just, right? It just,
the computer.
It's inundating, right? And so you might say, I was doing that for my safety, but to understand, again, to be accountable for all the things that are around you and are feeding whatever that fear is, it's not just that moment. There's so much more that builds that fear to the reality that you're living in.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize you were doing all that.
I know we're running late, but I just want to tell you the last little snippet, and then my story's done, and you can go on to all the rest of your questions.
Oh, you hit on all the things.
I know, I'm kidding.
Come on.
But so when I left, I was working on the Title IX sexual assault on college campuses because President Obama and Joe Biden, and they were all working on bringing that in. And I got involved with the U.S. Attorney's Office, educating campus cops and the different stakeholders at campuses about how to work, DOJ and an OCR. And so I left and opened my own firm. And my husband, who is a business consultant for lawyers and helps small firms, but a lot of people, do marketing, best business practices, do all this stuff and niching and what to do and how to speak and all that, and how to ask clients for money, which I'm really good at now. It was hard.
Yeah.
He helped me build this, and it was just me to begin with. I now have 4 lawyers here, and I like it small, and that's all good because it matters to me. Every single person who's here, it's about dignity and respect. It's about being part of a team. It's not a family. It's work. It's a team. But live your life. Be balanced. I'm working on it. Sometimes the boss is an idiot, but I'll talk to her. But I really expected to come out and be representing women complainants at college campuses across the country about people being sexually assaulted, and I did, but I also was doing federal and state criminal defense. So I have 2 lawyers that do federal and state, 2 great lawyers that do that. Someone who I was actually at the Federal Defender's Office when I was a prosecutor, Paul Thomas, and we used to have cases against each other, and we liked each other because we were both good and reasonable, and and he's here now. He retired, so I'm blessed to have him and someone else who's a great lawyer that I knew from that way. So I feel really good about sort of opening up to that and letting that happen. But I'm now mostly representing. I don't do criminal defense anymore. I just haven't had the time and space. But I would say complainants, people bringing complaints, respondents, ones that are accused, but complainants, respondents, both male and female, but in sexual misconduct, mostly still female complainants, mostly male, but students, staff, faculty, anybody who's in an educational institution that's either bringing a complaint or being on the receiving end of a complaint. So I'm representing them, and I won't say against the schools, but in disciplinary proceedings at schools. I will file Office for Civil Rights complaints, and I do have a federal lawsuit, couple pending right now, which is actually about to go to trial, and I can't really talk about it, but it's going to trial on some very cutting edge title. It's a guy, so I would say 75% of the people right now represent guys, and I did not expect that.
Right.
I expected, and I think I'll just tell you, nobody can know what's happening on college campuses in this segment of the population until they've seen what I've seen.
Mm.
Is, but take your basic 18-year-old kids, maybe never had a sexual experience, maybe did, maybe been on social media most of their life. Many of them have some type of psychological, emotional disability, ADHD, Asperger's on the spectrum, depression, anxiety. They're in college for the first time. It's mostly alcohol or some type of drugs involved. Doesn't have to be. They don't know what they're doing. They have no life experience because they've grown up on social media and video games. They come together in a sexual encounter and they don't know what they're doing. They don't. And I'm the first person to say, obviously nobody should ever touch you or do anything that you don't want them to do or you don't consent to. But it's kind of craziness because it's a weird situation. So they have these rules at school now that's been developed by Obama and the Biden administration and handed down through OCR. And Connecticut's particularly in line with that. It's affirmative consent now. So there's a disciplinary proceeding at school. For example, sexual misconduct. If you kiss me on the cheek and I don't want you to, I can bring a complaint against you. And mostly when I grew up anyway, thank God there was no text or any social media. But if someone did that to me, I mean, that would be like, don't do that or you walk away. I wouldn't have even thought of bringing a complaint. But there's no tools, I don't think, for this new 18 to 20-year-old to know how to handle that. They're being taught it's a Title IX complaint. Then you bring a complaint, then it invokes this procedure, and then it's out of the complainant's hands usually. The school does what they want, and a lot of schools are doing what's called academic capital punishment. Bye-bye, no training, no education, they don't help the kids. And so every procedure differs at every school.
Yeah.
Usually it's a big deal. You come in, there's no contact orders, it's usually acquaintance, even if you want to call it acquaintance rape, even if it's non-consensual sex, which is rape, even though it's a different standard in criminal law, it's very complicated.
Right.
Say that happened. And let's not say, I don't want to say it was violent, forceful, predatory. Maybe it was, say for example, somebody's having sex. You have to get affirmative consent at every stage of sex. That means a verbal yes or no or physical So if I move from touching your hand to touching your shoulder, I'd have to know you wanted me to. It couldn't just be the normal flow. Just very difficult. I don't know any adults that do that. I mean, it just isn't, I'm not saying it's bad.
Right.
But they're being trained on this and it's all, so I don't know, it's very interesting.
Well, and it's for a lot of people, it's the first time. So you're 18 years old, so you have 18 years of life one way or another, right? Whether you're the complainant or the defendant in the situation, either way, that rule is being placed, that there's actual, and, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I spoke with a woman last week about sexual assault and violence. Specifically, she started a lot of her work on college campuses. And what we talked about was the fact that there's no conversation and there's no discourse and there's no learning about this stuff until there is something that happens. And when something happens, people get polarized into good and bad. And once you're in good and bad, you're not in a place of learning. You're not in a place of, it takes it so you can't actually, again, I mean, it's the same thing we were just talking about, but you can't be human and actually evolve in a situation or learn in a situation because you're either being punished or you're a victim or you fall into these categories where how do you actually evolve in any way that's beneficial moving forward? It's right. Like, so at 18, your first sexual experience, you've never been told that you're supposed to ask yes from wrist to elbow. One way or another.
Technically, schools are going to tell you that they put them through a training, but it's one of those videos you just click on and say, I saw it.
Well, but at 18 years old, right, you've been exposed to sexualized information from the day you were born, pretty much, because it's on every television set, it's in everything. That one of the things we talked about was about the fact that, like, guys have been given this message that they're just supposed to magically know what's going on in heterosexual relationships or sexual dynamics, to know what's happening in a woman's mind and be able to read all the cues. And from a woman's perspective, we need to be docile and let the male lead and let him be a man, because you don't want to encroach on his masculinity. And so
perhaps play hard to get, right?
Right. And so those two messages just are creating, and again, I think, as you mentioned, like, not to say that we're canceling out the fact that rape happened. It happened and it needs to be handled. But the larger issue that we're talking about, in the same way we're talking about the lack of conversation with regard to police and specifically the Black community, what we were talking about before, the lack of conversation and discourse around how male and female sexual encounters happen, and a lack of education. But you're putting people in a situation at college specifically where they now are insta adults, and they're supposed to know how to handle themselves in these situations. And that if you move from hand to elbow, that could mean that it completely shifts your life one way or another, as the victim, as the, either way. And so it's just very difficult, because when we resort to judicial review as our way of educating people on issues of social discourse, it loses the ability for you to actually learn and grow as a human and be connected with each other, because it becomes, you're the good guy, you're the bad guy, rather than we're all here trying to learn. And when we get to a point where it's policing at school one way or another, that's a very difficult place to start.
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
There's not that many people that represent both complainants and respondents.
Yeah.
And I talk to women's groups, and I go, because you lose some trust if you say, oh, I also represent guys, respondents. Although I've represented female respondents and male complainants and everybody.
Right.
But what it boils down to for me is schools are so first of all, schools deal with drugs, guns, violence. And so I do think they should be dealing with sexual misconduct. There's a whole thing out there that you shouldn't be dealing with, it should go somewhere else. No, this is education. Oh yeah, people are saying sexual misconduct should be somewhere else. But, well, I would say most of the people are being affected by it, which might be the objects of the Me Too movement. So there's this very interesting systemic institutional response to these things that are like, and it makes sense almost like, oh, maybe it should. It's like, well, no. They deal with everything else at school. School is a perfect place. I don't think what they're doing is being implemented the right way, but that was told to do by the Office for Civil Rights, who said, we won't give you samples because you would need to customize them. So schools are just like, and preponderance, feather over 50%. I talked to you, Nikki. I talked to someone else you're accusing of something. I like you. You cry. He basically tells me to go fuck myself because he's defensive because he didn't do it and she's making it up. I believe you. You win. You're out. That's how it works. So, and I'm making it simple, obviously. And I'm not denigrating any administrators. I think they're all trying to do it for the right reasons. But you're supposed to be the investigator. It took me 10 years watching FBI agents to even begin to be able to figure out what credibility was. The judge, the jury, the investigation. So what I do when I represent female complainants, and I've represented some that I thought the person should have been put in jail away for a long time, but they don't understand that once they invoke this process, it's out of their control. They can be re-traumatized. There's no safeties in place for them. People don't know what they're doing. You have to know how to interview a person who's had been sexually assaulted. You can't just, and so what I talk to them about beforehand is like, well, these are all the possibilities. Why don't you tell me your story once, which is usually horrible, and we'll put it on paper and never say, all the things you do to protect them, and then become the mediator between them and the school. Because every time they get a text, it's like, boom, cortisol. Yep. Oh my God.
Yep.
And so I have, it's been the hardest cases, but I've had a few cases of women that were pretty brutally sexually assaulted that did the very common, it was my fault. What did I do wrong? And parents didn't want to tell parents, and then parents that want to kill the kid. And kids, and for months, just all I'm trying to do is let this person heal. And I'm not, I do have a psych degree in sports psych, but I can't really say more than that.
Right.
I'll just be that mediator and just keep saying that to her. And and the other thing is, you don't have to do this for other women, man. Take care of yourself. And that's another lesson women don't always get.
Right.
And on the other hand, I've represented guys, and I'm not talking about anybody that was a brutal sexual predator, but guys that didn't know what they were doing and are willing to learn. And this is the perfect place to, why don't you do some nonviolent communication? And now, even though it is Betsy DeVos, there are some good things in her September 2017 OCR guidance that talks about due process. And the reason Nancy Gertner used to be a federal judge, do you know her?
No.
She's at Harvard now. Read some stuff about due process. She's good. She's a feminist, but she's like, you need to give everyone due process. And you have to give everyone due process because it's fair and you want it to be fair. But if you don't, you're going to end up getting sued, and this is going to drag out for 5 years. No. But we're not, and I love representing guys, and I didn't think I would be, and I feel like I'm coaching again. I feel like I'm talking to the 18-year-old son I didn't have, And I'm saying, listen, you're going to be interviewed in a couple hours. I'm an almost 60-year-old woman, and you're going to have to tell me pretty much everything about you, and including like, what size your genitals are. And the kids I'm on Zoom with them, right? Like, because they're going to ask you this. And then you have to be with that kid in that 18-year-old mind and be like, hey, I coached, I did it. Sometimes I swear, like, because I'm good with that, as you probably are very aware. I think we've been pretty good today. But I really think that, but now, and then this is what I say to them and their parents. You cannot change anything. And this is a life lesson. You can't change anything you've done in the past. You cannot change it. There's no judgment here because people do stuff. But all you can do is control what you're doing going forward. And I want to try to help you get in a place where 10 years from now, you can look back and know that you handle this with dignity and respect for yourself. And we get the school to handle it that way. So no matter what the outcome is, you're going to feel good about this. And if you're telling your kid how to handle stuff, you're going to be able to do that. And it's people who have faced adversity. And generally, from my perspective, go farther in life when they handle it in a good way, because you're willing to take someone because you know how the person who goes through school has perfect grades, goes to the right school, nothing bad ever happens. I'm like, what's going to happen if something goes wrong?
Right.
So there's a way to talk to kids and then work with the school to get a private investigator and do all the great investigations. So you walk and go, these are the real facts because you didn't do a good investigation. But to also work with them and the kids to try to get into some facilitative way that they can understand, although schools are still pretty much, nope, you're getting expelled.
Right.
And I'm pretty passionate about not treating people right. And also exactly what you were talking about before. The OCR requires schools to handle this in a way for a person who's been found responsible that doesn't separate them from their education if possible.
Okay.
They shouldn't. Should be part of it. Here's a perfect place. You can monitor them there, make them go through 10 different things. You can have a therapist there. Are they ready or not? Let them come back. Don't kick somebody out. Pisses them off, right? Get polarized. And what are they going to do? They're going to be pissed at the system. They're not going to learn. They might go back and then really get pissed off and do it again to someone else.
Right.
You don't do that. Get people to understand. You also get the victim to heal. Sometimes has to be, therapeutic. But when they can come back in, if someone could actually say to them, I am so sorry. Because they can't say it now. If they say that, they're going to get kicked out. Right. So there is, and I'm advocating for this other alternative model, which I'm trying to develop in a way that makes sense that schools could do that would be less expensive and would create this cult, because this is what creates culture change, which is what we're trying to do. My bet is, this is my marketing pitch, it's going to increase enrollment for you for males at schools, because I probably get 10 calls a day from people. I can't handle them all because it's so crazy. And you have, kangaroo courts of people that are just saying, oh, I didn't like the way you looked at me. And so therefore you're getting kicked out of school and there's nothing you can do.
Well, and it's so funny. There was a woman, I started a group at my school of women because it's 70% guys, 30% women that I was at school with. And so I'm very used to being in male dominated spaces. But one of the things that I don't know if fortunate's the word. I did not have any experience with the judicial process of this exchange in college. What if judicial is even the right word, but we'll say my college experience of whatever that looks like. And I was exposed to a story from somebody about that and how it went down in my school. And this was, 10 or so years ago. And yes, right now we're in this space where people believe more victims than they have in the past. But even just the sharing that I don't even know that I earned the sharing that was given to me, but hearing her story and hearing the way that she was, the expulsion that seems so ridiculous now was the same reaction to her claim of, well, you either have to you have to go through this experience a whole bunch of other times, and we're going to question and not believe you. And it was a very traumatic thing. You're going to have to keep doing that. And really, if you could do it for other people, that'd be cool. Like you were just saying, and so I think there's a part of this. Yes, we've moved towards believing more women in general, not just on college campuses, but also it's so deeply ingrained, not just 10. I mean, it's so deeply ingrained in so much of society, unfortunately, that we don't believe we don't believe the victim necessarily. And so it's this going from one side and swinging all the way to the other side of the spectrum of saying, like, we're going to believe everybody, we're going to kick everybody out. Again, we're missing the middle. We're missing the middle of actually being able to change, you said culture change, right? To change the way we actually have conversation around sexual interaction, or really just human interaction. But in this case, how you actually interact with the opposite sex, or not even opposite sex, of somebody that is of interest to you in a sexual way.
Yeah, and I feel like I have an answer.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's like, who's going to listen? And, you know, there is a way that comports with OCR, that comports with the law, because I've been doing it. And I'm just trying to make this in a way to just get one institution to say, just do this as a pilot project. I mean, I obviously am not getting paid for this. I want to just be like, someone just listen to me and want to do it. But I will tell you from my experience, institutions are exhausted.
Yeah.
They put so much effort into this process. They don't have the time, the money, the energy to push it over a little bit. And in the end, it would be less costly. It would create culture change.
Yeah.
You know, it's so hard.
And just to make, so this is, it would still be in the stage of post this experience happening, correct?
Well,
did I hear that right?
Well, you could take part of this and put it as a real training. I mean, they do trainings at orientation, but it's, you know, it's a trainings you do in work when it's like sexual harassment in the job and everyone laughs because, yeah, of course, you have a poster with somebody's boobs on it. Okay, click. But you could do some role playing or some sharing from somebody to get this that's real, that goes home, that you could do a better training. But yes, I'm saying post, you have the option to go through a formal process that's mandated. The option to do this, probably have a therapist make sure that each person's actually safe enough to do that. For the survivor, I'm assuming it really happened, or for the accused, because if the you know, therapist says, well, you know, he's a sociopath and a sexual predator, he shouldn't have the option to go through the nice path. And I mean the path that's gonna, because nothing will happen. And then that, you determine what happens after that. Do you have a single mediation where they hear each other and then you hear them once and you bring them together and they get through that? And then they both say like, wow, this is so cool. And they respect each other and they're learning and healing and balance and they move on, they're good. And then they tell other people and the culture changes. Right. And at any point they could say, this isn't working, let's go back to this other process. Right. It'd be fairly simple.
Yeah, because it's not all that Law and Order story.
No.
Right?
Yeah. But it's all about institutional liability and OCR coming in and do they approve it? Because if they don't, we're going to get this taken from us. And
there's a lot of steps and processes that dilute that very simple sounding plan.
Yeah, which is why I just want to looking toward retirement. I love doing it, but there's a point where, you know, you were talking about before, just having the passion and it's like, oh, I'm getting tired.
Yeah. Well, and even you were talking about before that taking a minute, being like, I'm leaving this mountaintop right now and then coming back for another one, right? If sometimes it does get you to a point where, especially if you're somebody that likes to give your all, which I know you are, even though as you give your all each time, you try to find more of a balance of not giving everything to and not sleeping or not doing whatever the equivalent of sleep needs to be. But like, it gives you more energy when you're able to take a minute and see outside of the hustle of how you can actually make an impact one way or another. And being, saying, you know what, I think I'm done right now. It's a beautiful thing to be able to do for yourself.
Yeah. I do want to say one more thing.
Go, bring it.
What got very exhausting for me about maybe 10 years ago was what I perceived to be a vacuum in women understanding this generation. Because, Title IX's here, so people kind of say it's okay and they don't want to fight and they want to fit in. And you didn't see the activists that were there. You just didn't see that. Before Me Too, before that, there was, as a person that did, there was just, you weren't making a difference. You were fighting your own, I was at Yale saying, you're calling it the men's soccer team and to the, women's soccer, going to say, don't call it girls soccer, call it women's soccer.
Right.
Or call it men's, just those things like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And you can get more and we don't need it. We're okay. That kind of thing. So I actually I filed with 14 female students and 2 coaches at Guilford College, which is a Quaker institution in North Carolina, a lawsuit about Title IX, because every school in sports is basically out of compliance as far as I'm concerned. If they have but we ended up, long story, filed this lawsuit and ended up, those 14 women and the 2 coaches were so refreshing. They were so diverse, racially, sexually, progressive, non-progressive, but people that were coming together that had the courage as a group to do this. And we ended up settling it. There's a public consent decree. And the school is having the plaintiffs come back and be part of the healing. And this, because it's Quaker too, right? But they're coming back to do this conference. And to me, I'm like, oh, I should quit. I should have quit when I had my best season at Yale. You know, you quit. But I'll tell you this too, with Me Too, that's really great to see this coming up. And obviously there's a lot of challenges if there's one false story and all that. But I will say, when I listen to your podcast, you are one of these women in this group that gives me hope and refreshes my inspiration. Seriously.
Oh my goodness.
Are you talking like this? We need women that aren't 60. You know, there's a middle group of people that need to, you know, understand this. And it doesn't have to be a massive, mad reaction, but just do what you're doing. Yeah. Bring these stories out. It's really important. And it is inspiring. It's like, oh, I don't have to do it. Someone else can do some of it.
Yeah,
so
no.
I love you. I think you asked people, but if they're listening, they should definitely, what's the fundraising platform you use?
Oh God. Patreon. No, you can, I use Patreon. I didn't know that's where this was going.
No, but I don't ever give anyone money because I all the time. But it was the first thing I did because I so believe it's so important and want to support you and other women that want to do this. And for them to also know there are so many women in the wise, older, crone generation that are there to support you that don't know you're there and you don't know they're there. But if you found each other, there would be this amazing amount of strength. There
is so much strength. And thank you for that. I tried not to cry. I think I kept myself together a little bit. This experience of stepping out of line is really what it is. And like, that's why when you were talking about being like, oh, you're going to sure, fire me. Oh, I don't care. Or yeah, kick me out of school. I don't care. Like, there's something about that is, I wish that more people had exposure to that being an okay way of living your life as well. No, you're fine.
No, I'm just hanging up on.
You're right. You know, that like, if something isn't working or if you're being mistreated, it's okay to acknowledge it. If someone around you, so I've had a lot of, I'm not the best at, well, I am much better now, so let me give some credit to that, but I'm better now at saying when something is being done to me or impacting me, saying this is not okay for me, but I've always been much better at seeing it happening to other people and standing up and saying something. And living in the life that I lived, and I think living the life that I lived 3 or 4 years ago of really following the right path and getting the paycheck and doing all the right things, you lose the understanding that that's an option to say, hey, wait a second, this doesn't work. Because in order for you to keep that, you know, keep that life going, to stop and say, hold on, can we look at that? And that didn't feel good. You fall off the treadmill, right? And so you need to then get yourself back on. And this experience of stepping off the treadmill, stepping off that machine of sorts, and looking around and seeing how many incredible women have been here before me and have been doing this way before and doing things that I didn't even know was happening before I ever said, oh my goodness, you know, there's a lot of racial injustice here. And I know it sounds silly to like say, right? But giving credit where credit is due, but also asking and allowing yourself to be educated from people that have already been there, rather than taking the 2 seconds of information you had in some history book that was probably written by somebody that wasn't impacted by the things that happened, and really getting the real truth from the people that lived it, rather than the TV shows that told you some synthesized version or some, you know, social media dramatized, sensationalized aspect of life, you know? And so I think that that's really important. But the other part that I love, I didn't know what the crone archetype was until the first interview that I did here with Megan Baker. But like the idea of kind of giving to generations behind and really fostering and serving as wisdom and serving as a guide and serving as support in some kind of way too, but also sharing and having this kind of cyclical nature of education and learning. But then also for me, it's been, how do I not only talk to the people around me in my generation with the same kind of thing, but how do I then talk to and create space for and encourage those who are coming behind? That, I mean, my sister, my brothers are 10 to 15 years younger than me? How do I create a space for conversation that can happen there? Yeah. And even younger. And it's not something, again, I don't think it's something that we have been given much education around how to do something like that. It's just kind of like, okay, you go to 18 years of school, go into work, or I should say more than 18 years, go to work, do your work thing and then you retire. And that's your linear journey. And it's much more than that. Right. And I think women specifically, especially being in very male dominated spaces through most of my life, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been around a lot more women and actively trying to be around a lot more women of different ages, of different backgrounds, because I feel like that's a bigger education than I ever got in any of the schooling that I had.
Yeah.
It's really important to do that.
And I would just say that one of the other things that really helped me shift my journey, because I was very comfortable being around men. I had 6 brothers. I always wanted to be one of the Duffy brothers. And I realized, that most of my friends were guys.
Yeah.
And I went to something called Women Within International. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Check it out.
I will. I'm writing it down.
And it's been around for 30-something years. I think Shar Tozy began it. Her husband began Mankind Project.
Okay.
If I get this all wrong, so sorry. But they're very separate because women and men are culturally very different, as well as physiologically. But it's the basic premise from my perspective is that you want to learn how to be authentic. And I went to this weekend from a Friday to a Sunday. And when I came back, that's when I quit the attorney's office a year later. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was the first time, whatever my issues were growing up or whatever, that I experienced the complete power of women and of myself as a woman and as a woman. And it's an experience and it's not therapy. And I have, this is international. I meet with 5 other women that went through it twice a month. I've been doing it at my house.
Wow.
And we do the same thing. And it's about working. So it's a little ritualistic, which I love.
Yeah.
Candles, doing the directions, all that stuff. But it's all over and it's there. And when I was at my weekend, it was from people that were 17 up to 85. And if you want to talk about coolest place, no judgment, that is so well done, because I think I know everything. And, I'm the first one to be like, that doesn't work. But and from a very sciencey perspective, it was really very brilliant. And it's online. It's cool to do. If people can't afford it, there's scholarships. It is amazing. It's not one of those places that are getting out there and marketing to get you in.
Right.
Word of mouth. But you can, if you see somebody, you can almost be like, did you go to that weekend? But it's about being, who am I? What am I doing? How do I talk to other people? How do I recognize the crone energy, the magical child, the wizard, the magician, the lover, and to be in the presence now and get to where, to me, where I probably should have been when I was 18, but I'm getting closer. And the same guys have gotten other, and it's incredibly supportive, and it's from people that just feel like they're not contented to people who've suffered severe trauma. Incredible organization. And I have my own judgments about everything, but if there's a place for women now that you're talking about, if they don't have that community, if they don't have younger siblings, if they don't have or they don't know how to do it, this is a place where you can go with complete anonymity. And it's online and people are there to connect with, and it's worth doing, especially from someone who might not naturally be inclined to kind of, I think if you're like a yoga instructor and you meditate, you might be more likely to do that.
Yeah. Wait, say the name of both the one that you went on and the male one again, just so we have the names there.
Oh, I hope these are correct.
That's okay.
So there's Women Within International.
Okay.
It's not the Women Within plus sizing clothing manufacturing store. It's Women Within International. And then there's an East Coast Women Within.
Okay.
Which is just for the East Coast, but this is across continents. And then it's MKP, which is Mankind Project. And that's also international. And they have these weekends, probably 6-7 times around the globe every year, and support groups forever after. And sometimes they have groups you can go to without going on the weekend. It's just worthwhile to look into, because there's a community if people don't have it. And it's there, but sometimes people are isolated and don't see it.
Right. And a lot of times it's, I mean, I have a lot of friends that are like, well, will you go with me? Or this feeling of like, I can't, it's hard to get yourself or push yourself over that process, especially if you think other people are going to show up with other people or whatever. And knowing that there's a space that it's really for your personal journey And hearing you speak so highly of it, it makes me feel like, okay, when's the next one? I'm signing up.
Of course, now I want you to go, but I know that I can't make you go, but I want to like send you emails, but people don't do it themselves.
Yeah. I'll include it. Go.
It's so cool. I'd love you to check it out. I mean, it really.
Okay. I wrote it down. It's going to be in the show notes so that listeners don't have to do a full on Google on it, but I am excited about that. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you need more information, let me know.
I will.
That much, really.
Well, thank you. All right. So the last thing that I have here is about the college admissions scandal. I know we were talking about your work in campus sexual assault, but I know that the college admissions scandal has been in your world lately. And I unexpectedly wasn't expecting it to kind of come into my world. I didn't really know much about it. Well, I had seen it come up on some wonderful social media of news sources. And then having conversations with my father, knowing that there was connections within the Connecticut soccer family. And so one of the things that I found so difficult about it in general, and then a lot of things that are breaking on social media lately, is that I feel like so much of this stuff has become sensationalized before you actually get much information. And there's one human being that gets kind of all the spotlight, or one experience that gets all the spotlight and that takes away from the reality of what the situation is. So I guess my thought around it was, I know you're part of the Connecticut soccer family, and I know you've been involved in some of the aspects that I saw a picture of you here in Boston. And so my thoughts about, I guess my question is, as we're learning stuff through things like social media and very, very sensationalized messages, how do you feel like things have gotten lost in the mix when news breaks, and specifically news about legal aspects of things to the larger public? How do you feel that that's kind of been impacted on a larger scale?
So I can tell you, when I was a federal prosecutor, that the public never knows the real story.
Yeah. Because
A, can't say some of it. B, you may be protecting witnesses or victims. C, there's some things you can't say because, it hasn't risen to a certain level. For example, let's just say that but let's just say they caught somebody that, has a gun and they're not supposed to. And they're saying, you need to go in jail for 10-year man. And I'm like, that's ridiculous, Trina. Nobody else may know, but you may have videos from gang fights where you see this person killing people and all this mayhem and years where stuff has happened, and you know about it, but you're not going to bring cases on it. Nobody's going to know that. So when people, and I think there's a lot of valid issues that come up about police brutality, about, all these things, but the public saying, how can this happen? As a federal prosecutor, I always felt hamstrung that you want to explain.
Right.
And you can't. And if they really knew the whole story, they'd get it, because it isn't as binary. It's not black and white. It's not, this is what happens. It's a mandatory minimum because of this. There are usually decisions on both sides that go into everything.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody's pleading to something and everyone's pissed because it's so much, but maybe that person knows if they don't do that, they're going to be looking at, 3 lifetimes, but that never comes out.
Right.
So it's good to bring up issues, but when people get, it's very difficult. So I don't think people really understand what's going on.
Right.
Big picture, ever.
Yeah.
And you just want to explain how.
Right.
And a lot of times people will be protecting someone that they don't understand, that like the feds are protecting. I'm not saying it. Or the other way around. They dismiss a case and they're like, well, they're dismissing it because it's a woman or, it's a person of color. But it's like, no, it's because that person asked us because of safety reasons to do this. And
right. So
it gets, whatever happens gets put into people's ideas of what's going on, which is fed by the news, which is, it's all important. But if I could say one thing to people, I'd say, don't think you have the whole picture.
Right.
People can't always tell you.
And silence doesn't mean, right? Because I feel like the part of it that happens is we get all these words and you get all the photos, right? The information you do get becomes king or queen, if we want to be, right? Becomes paramount to the things that are silent. And therefore they're given much more credibility than the fact that we might not know things. I feel like watching even just the Robert Mueller report of just how people have analyzed things from most of that time has been no information at all, has been a really interesting, even just no matter how you feel about it, just in the discourse of how analyzing no information has gone and how far people go in all different directions with violence.
Did you watch any of his testimony?
It did.
So I was like, I have a tremendous amount of respect for him.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking like, oh, what he could say. Because, like, yes. And I would have done the same thing. Like, this is what's in the report, but you just, and you could, he's, but there was a few I things and it's like, so,
right.
But really you just don't know. Yeah. Yeah, and it was interesting with the college scandal. And I can't talk about it because we're representing one of the defendants, but I can talk about whatever's public.
Yeah.
But I think that was, an important thing. I mean, I think here's what I'll say that's not related to that, but it's related to my experience. You take athletics, and I coached at Yale, which is not full scholarship.
Right.
It's, basically kids that have grown up in some sort of stability, not necessarily, and I get that, but it's really a lot of it is the upper economic, part, not all everybody, but it's not schools, where there's all the other pressures because it's your life and you might not ever get out of your life if you don't get this scholarship and go to this school. And it's, it's okay athletics.
Right.
You're not going to flunk out of school or get kicked out. And there's technically no scholarships. But I coach there, and I know being in that what you have is a bunch of coaches who care passionately, who care about winning, who are probably the best in their sport, who are the high level, and all they want these to do is to get these kids to come understand their passion and play great and be their parent and help them. Yeah. And then you take sports, which is about physical bodies. You have guys coaching women. You know what I mean? And you have women and men together, but it is about your body, how it functions, what it looks like, the eating disorders, the things that happen in athletics, the focus on the body, the okay with touching the body because it's about that. And it is okay unless it's not okay.
Right.
And the competition and the kids then that come into sports that are so many times look at coaches as parental figures. And so they're looking at that. So there's all that extra pressure. It's not like an adult coming in a pro thing and being like, yeah, I'll pay for you. You pay me $1 million, I'll play. Otherwise I'm going somewhere else. It's like, oh, I love this person. Right. And they're trying to figure their life out. And they come in and you mix it all up and you put in a high pressure academic situation. And then you get administrations that say, hey, look, it's all about making sure the kids balance in academics, but you're not going to get a contract if you don't win. And I found it to be a place, and then you put money in there, right? Especially a place like Yale, where a lot of people have money. And that whole environment is so, I always say I went into law and it's much less stressful and more ethical than athletics. And that's scary. Yeah. And I think what you see in the college scandal is that a lot, I don't find that surprising at all. Yeah. Because you just see all the stuff and it's just what happens when people get in that situation and are all trying to do things for the right reason. Yeah. Yep. It's really, I wish maybe I can talk to you sometime in the cases of.
Yeah, let's do that. I feel like that's good. Yeah. It was a very, the part that because at first when I saw it, I didn't actually understand what was happening. And then when I started reading it, knowing that I grew up around college sports for so much of my life. And then I played college sports and I'll tell you this, there was no scholarship money coming my way for that. But like, it's just been, again, it's part of an experience that I've had from such a young age that I was in coaches' offices with a little nugget, right? Like I had snot on my nose all the time, really little. And so seeing it from the media perspective of like how it's kind of this mystifying space, and also knowing what it was like, and then knowing that it was part of it was in Connecticut, and like, oh my God, my dad knows some of these, there was all that stuff that I was like, it's just really incredible. And judgment aside, it was just really incredible to me how the story became such a a big, I don't know, so, not to say that it's not worth talking about, but became such like a sensationalized movie in itself, rather than a conversation about misconduct one way or another. That's the part, that's kind of what I've taken out of it. So,
Yeah,
well,
I hear ya.
thank you so much for talking. So thank you so much for talking to me about this. I feel like, okay, so we really have talked about all the things. Oh, my last thing I'm going to talk about is women's national team. You talked about playing, you talked about coaching. We talked about Title IX. The women's national team has gotten a lot of kind of global stature exposure, specifically around pay equity. What has your reaction been to, Megan Rapinoe her face being everywhere, and the chant after the World Cup win being about paying women well and really equality? Kind of, how did that feel for you? How did you see how that all went down, and what do you see kind of coming next out of that, or do you hope coming next out of it?
So it's a great question.
And
it's not complicated. It's very simple because I know how I feel now. But because we did so much to advance women's soccer.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of times, and I know now because at UCONN, I'm trying to get them to take those 2 years of club and get those women back involved because nobody even knows they were there.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's horrible. To me, though, aside from the fact I'm like, they'll donate money now. They're the ones that have jobs. You should be doing it for your own reasons. But these are the women that didn't get the accolades. Those are the people. So I have a little bit of chip on my shoulders. I'm going through this, and Ants and Dorrance and everybody's getting all this stuff, and we're like, yeah, we broke our backs for this, and a little bit, even though I thought it was cool, but I did. I'm going to admit it.
Yeah.
I will tell you this. If you've ever sat with me when we watch any kind of soccer, I'm very difficult to sit with because your dad taught me about really good soccer. So unless you're playing great soccer, I can't stand watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't stand it. And I am a critic and I can't stand myself.
Mm-hmm.
I thoroughly enjoyed watching every game I saw that the U.S. played this year.
Yes.
It's the first time I saw a parody of skills that I have never seen before. I have tremendous respect, and I'm speaking globally, but I have tremendous respect for Jill Ellis.
Yes.
Coach. For all the shit she was taking and for how she did it, I knew her dad when he coached down in Virginia. I don't know all the backstory. I don't know any of the backstory, but what I saw, I just think she was amazing. And what I would say to every single person that I've heard with my chip on my shoulder, because I've heard it. I think Michelle Akers has done it. I think and I would love to be able to say their names, but I can't because I don't remember.
Okay.
But I know Megan's one of them. But every single time I've heard them say, it's not just us. We're stepping up from the backs of the women that did that. I don't know if they know how significant that is and how that resounds so well on the shoulders of everyone before me, not me, but everybody. It is so important. It's so cool to hear them say that. I think there's a whole swelling, they could go back there and find people and there could be this great organization.
Yeah.
For Megan Rapinoe, whether I agree or not about her comments or what she did or the teacup or whatever that kind of, I was going to write a letter, but I haven't gotten around to it. After Justice Ginsburg wrote a letter, I'm like, I can write a letter then. But to just say, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
More power to you guys.
Yeah.
How cool is it? And I'll tell you this, because not a lot's changed since 1972. A lot has, but not a lot has. Mm-hmm. And for you guys, as a team, even though, it would be very hard to do as one person and most people in a one-person spot, but for you guys to do that in a position of power is helping everybody else see that this is a theme that no one's, and I want to say thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for doing it. Whether I agree or disagree with what you're doing, thank you for doing it. I love the fact she kneeled. I'm going to write a whole article to take sports, which is supposed to be the socio-cultural way to figure out how to do nonviolent stuff and get up to bend your knee to bring notice to inequity or unfairness is beautiful. And why wouldn't anyone want you to do that? And more power when she did that. It was cool. Just amazing. She should know, and the whole team, that it's so cool they're doing this, and I hope they don't lose momentum. Yeah. I just think it's so amazing. even if it's just one of them, but the fact that they're sticking together and doing it is, and you know what, in the end, I hope if whatever happens to them, let's just say it becomes punitive and they don't get money, that women with money give them money. You know, I think there's enough out there. I think it's cool. And I hope that they really know that they're affecting more than just themselves. And that's important.
Yeah. I felt all that in my body, the acknowledgement of women before, and like having such a concrete example of, if you're talking about women's soccer specifically, the lineage that has gotten you to this point right now where you can be unabashedly yourself, right? And you can be on a stage swearing, because God forbid a woman swears, and saying this is not okay. Mm-hmm. And acknowledging that it came from so much more is just like, it then shows you that, again, that moment will impact so many generations going forward as well. I mean, I'll never forget watching the World Cup when I was how old was I? It was 99, so I was 11. No, that's not true. So you can't do math. But I was a preteen. We'll say that. They give me some room. That like watching and playing soccer, right? Playing soccer before I knew I had a choice whether or not to play soccer. But watching that experience and knowing, I knew who Michelle Akers was. Michelle Akers was on my wall, right? But she was the elder in that situation. And feeling like this just changed my life in my perspective of the sport that I love. And then still knowing that we still have so far to go. And I stopped playing a long, long time ago, right? But like understanding that the fact that we have the visual ability to see these things and to actually have a microphone in these women's hands and people wanting to continue conversations and create spaces where they are leading the conversations. They're not necessarily just reacting to what other people want to ask, is just incredible for the future with which we can see.
And if any of them are listening, I do Title IX, Title VII, gender equity stuff.
Yes.
They have great representation, but if there's anything I can do to ever help, or they want a blog or whatever. And do you know, Nikki, your mom was part of that history, right?
I do. She doesn't, we don't talk about it very much. I feel like I need to be like, hey, Ma, tell me more.
Can I tell you a little story or should I not?
You can tell me all the story. Oh, yes. Yeah. Come on.
You can edit this if you need to.
She's going to be like, I already feel her eye rolling right now, or just like, oh.
So do I, and I'm not even her daughter. No, again, I don't know if this is true, but we were going up to Rutland, Vermont to play a game against Franz, your dad was coaching. Mm-hmm. And we ended up getting everyone together. And of course, only like 6 people showed up because someone fell downstairs, someone else was hungover, blah, blah, blah. And we drove to Vermont to go to play a game in Rutland. And we were elitist enough that if we had 7, we're like, yeah, we can play and we'll beat you anyway. And it's better because we don't need the extra people. You know, you're in our way. We only had 6. Except your mom came because she was hanging out with Franz. Yeah. And we were like, oh, we need a 7. And we gave her, I remember saying, I got extra shorts. I didn't know her. I'm like, just put them on and play. I mean, right, you know. And I think she scored 3 goals. And
sounds like, right.
Oh man, I'm hooked, right? And then she was one of the crew. We just play all the time and bonded and did that, and just it was really amazing.
Talk about a competitive person too. She taught me so much about, I don't want to cry here. She taught me so much about being able to be a fierce competitor and not try to be ladylike. Which is
it's so interesting because your mom's beautiful and looks ladylike. Like I look ladylike. I look like the athlete. But you know what I mean.
I do. And like I think it was such a pivotal aspect for me in my life of understanding that to be feminine isn't to be told you're pretty. And to be feminine isn't to play the Susie Homemaker archetype. It's you can be a fierce competitor and you can go out and fight hard for the thing that you really enjoy doing, and you can fail, and that's okay. And it doesn't make you any less of who you are. Like that's the kind of stuff. Ooh, I'm gonna start crying about my mom right now. But that's the kind of stuff that I wish, and I hope, again, that's why I feel like it's so important to be around so many women and create community among each other, because to see models of people that are doing that before you is so important. And again, the history books haven't been written by or about women as full human beings, and the camera hasn't been on women, and you haven't seen women's sports, and you haven't seen women lead, it's really difficult to see yourself having the ability to do that. And so I am so grateful for my mother for modeling that, for constantly reiterating that message to me. And then, honestly, for you showing up in my life at such a young age. I mean, you knew me before I knew me, right? Like, and showing me what it is to be a woman outside of, if not for meeting you and meeting the strong women that were part of my aunt and uncle vibe of my soccer family, I would never have understood myself in the way that I do, and understood my place in the world that I'm still trying to figure out, in a way that I can help other people be okay to be themselves, male, female, non-gender, you don't identify as a gender, whatever, but just show up and be you and be fully yourself. You don't have to be a mold of something to be a viable human being. And even better, tap into the people that have already been there before. Why not? So, now I feel like I should have had tissues. I've got tears on my face. Well, we've talked for so very long, and I feel like you invited the follow-up conversation, so we'll have to spend that one.
Cool. I just got started.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Really, it's great to see you and hear you.
Too.
And if you got anything from me, I feel like my existence has been worthwhile.
Oh my goodness. Well, like tenfold. So your existence is worthwhile times a million. Come on now.
Yeah, it's all on you. So if you tell me it's not, like, a lot of pressure.
I got it. Thank you.
Wasn't Felice incredible? Oh, she just had so much incredible stuff to say. And if you made it 2 hours in here, I think you enjoyed the conversation as well. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment on social media, send me a DM, share this on your social media with your thoughts and your comments. That'd be incredible. That would be an amazing way to do that 3-person share gift I mentioned earlier. And I am so excited to hear from you and what you think about this stuff, because I get so excited, and to hear from you is a gift in itself. So, also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you haven't rated or reviewed this, that would be incredible. It helps us get this wonderful podcast out to the world, in front of more ears and more eyes, and spreading the word of connection and humanity. I mean, who doesn't want more of that? All right, I will catch you on the next episode. See you later.